Everything begins in the western lands of the Mahidoro continent, where 4 years have passed since Emperor Cardion took the throne of the Eshresher Empire and began conquering all the neighboring kingdoms. In the midst of this terrible vortex of war was a mercenary who preferred to hide his past from everyone he seemed to carry incredibly deep secrets. Suddenly, the story flashes back to when a young Elric is caught off guard by the sudden announcement that he needs to get married immediately. Completely clueless, he questions his father about it, who simply explains that his bride will be Baron Wyben's daughter. The father continues to share details, saying the young lady is only 16 years old, extremely beautiful, and her only hobby is tending to the garden. Right after that, the doors to the grand meeting hall slowly begin to swing open before them. Elric's father believes the two make a fine match, and that is how, at just 14 years old, the boy sees his destiny change drastically. He ended up engaged to a young noblewoman without even knowing what her face looked like, leaving him completely speechless by the whole situation. Elric simply could not process the idea that he was actually about to get married out of nowhere. Already dressed for the big ceremony, he still tries to understand what is happening while staring at the massive angel statue in the chapel. At that moment, he wonders why such an important noblewoman from such a distinguished lineage would ever accept this union. After all, it made no sense for someone from high society to marry the heir of a simple merchant family like his. His thoughts are interrupted when the bride finally enters the hall and greets him with breathtaking elegance. Elric is completely frozen and blushing as he looks at her face, only managing to whisper Tyria's name. She formally introduces herself as Tyria Wyben while walking gracefully toward him in her beautiful wedding dress. The girl's beauty is overwhelming, with bright golden hair that resembles fields of wheat and green eyes shining like spring buds. Her skin is extremely fair and delicate, contrasting perfectly with lips as red as cherries. If Elric had to describe her in just one sentence, he would say she is a mysterious and incredibly refined young lady. Suddenly, someone taps Elric on the shoulder to remind him to introduce himself, snapping him out of his trance. Feeling a bit awkward, he bows to her and says he hopes they can build a good life together from that day forward. Even though the boy's mind is an absolute mess because of how fast everything is moving, a single clear thought manages to stand out in the middle of the chaos. He realizes that, from that solemn moment at the altar, he will spend the rest of his days beside that very special person. Looking back, Elric understands that the overwhelming feeling he had when he saw her was his first love. When it comes time to exchange rings, he feels so self-conscious about the silly smile trying to slip onto his face that he has to force himself to hide it. He puts on a more serious face just to contain the immense joy he feels inside during the vows. However, focused entirely on his own happiness, he was completely oblivious to a crucial detail about the bride. Elric had no idea that this whole forced situation could be deeply hurting Tyria's feelings. Time passes, and the scene changes to a heavily stormy night outside the grand family mansion. Inside one of the rooms, a single lit candle burns slowly in the silence of the night. Elric fidgets restlessly with his wedding ring, still trying to digest how everything happened so fast. He smiles shyly while lying in bed, thinking that such an elegant young lady is now truly his wife. But the memory of his father announcing that his bride would be Baron Wyben's daughter echoes loudly in his mind again. And as the memories of that conversation rush back, the smile on the young man's face begins to fade. After all, no matter how much he tries to analyze the situation from every possible angle, none of it makes real sense. Tossing and turning in bed, Elric decides to ask the housekeeper directly why a noblewoman would agree to marry the heir of a merchant family. The housekeeper named Rhonda looks away and hesitates a lot, visibly uncomfortable with that question. Noticing her reaction, Elric presses on and begs her to tell him the whole truth once and for all. Rhonda remains silent for a few moments, seemingly fighting an internal battle against the weight of that secret. She finally reveals to the young master that the whole thing is nothing more than a strict marriage of convenience. The housekeeper explains that although the Wyben family had a lot of fame and wealth in the past, today they are drowning in debt and have no funds left to survive. Because of this, Elric's father demanded the marriage as a condition to pay off all the nobles' debts and provide the necessary financial backing. She adds that through this union, the Portman merchant family will finally be able to raise their status and enter the nobility. Shocked by the revelation, Elric asks if this means the girl was basically sold to them, receiving only Rhonda's heavy silence as an answer. He falls into despair as he realizes the terrible reality behind his marital bliss. Consumed by an enormous amount of guilt, he begins to anxiously question what his own father was capable of doing. Unable to contain his emotions, Elric flings the bedroom doors open and leaves the worried housekeeper behind. He begins to run desperately through the castle hallways with an urgent need to give an explanation. All the boy wants in that moment of pure distress is to find Tyria and offer his sincerest apologies for what happened. He runs against the clock, extremely anxious, looking for any excuse or justification he can give to ease that terrible situation. Exhausted from running so much, the boy has to lean his hand against the hallway wall while trying to catch his breath. He bends over completely worn out, but his determination to speak with her keeps him from giving up right then. With his heart racing and sweat dripping down his face, he keeps panting as he approaches her room. Finally, he arrives before the grand, luxuriously decorated doors of the quarters where she is staying. As he places his hand on the wood to open it, Elric notices the door is cracked open slightly and hears a muffled sound coming from inside. Peeking silently through the crack in the door, he freezes completely upon hearing quiet sobs of crying. On the other side, young Tyria's face is completely flushed as she sheds tears of deep sadness. She appears curled up on the floor of the dark room, hugging her knees while crying softly in her loneliness. The sound of that heartbreak breaks Elric's heart, leaving him in shock as he realizes his bride's miserable state. The exact moment he sees her crying in such a painful way, the boy decides to take a step back and walk away. It was right there that he made a drastic choice and a silent promise that he would find a way to end that unhappy marriage. The scene changes to the next day, where we see Elric's father signing new business documents with all the calm in the world. While the man works peacefully in his luxurious office, quick, loud footsteps echo from outside. Suddenly, Elric slams the doors open with extreme aggression and yells for his father in a tone of pure anger. Without any hesitation, the boy immediately demands that the arranged marriage be cancelled once and for all. He confronts his father directly about the fact that Tyria was bought just to save her family from financial ruin. With eyes full of despair and anguish, the young man begs from the bottom of his heart for his father to change his mind. However, the man merely turns around slowly and speaks his son's name in an extremely cold and sharp voice. He glares at the boy with a terrifying expression and orders him to stop acting like a spoiled brat right this instant. The father stands up imposingly and reminds his son that they now belong to the nobility and that he needs to start acting like it. That incredibly cold look, completely devoid of any affection, hits the boy like a physical blow. This makes Elric remember, with a lot of bitterness, the harsh and sad reality he always lived with inside that house. After all, he always carried the burden of being seen by his own father as the son to blame for his mother passing away on the day he was born. To the patriarch, Elric was never anything more than a mere puppet, a tool with no will of its own, used only to secure the family's rise faced with so much coldness and scorn. The boy realizes that there is no room left for discussion and decides to turn his back on his father for good. He finally accepts the painful truth that he never meant anything more than a simple tool of self-interest to his own parent. It is in this moment of deep disappointment that he makes the firm decision that he needs to disappear from that house as soon as possible. He would do this both to free the poor girl who was sold for money and to completely ruin his father's grand plans for his escape to work. The young man decides to drop the Portman surname and everything that connected him to that ambitious family. That very night, an extremely heavy rain begins to pour relentlessly over the vast wheat fields of the region. Under the severe storm, the boy starts his journey of escape without looking back, carrying only a backpack and a sword at his waist. As he walks through the darkness, he still finds himself questioning the real reasons that made Tyria cry so much in that room. Elric wonders if she was suffering because she was sold, because she left her homeland, or if she was crying simply because she hated the idea of marrying him. But he knows very well that no matter how much he tries to find those answers, there is no turning back on his decision. With that, he pushes those doubts out of his head for good and decides to move forward with his escape into the unknown. Many years pass, and the story takes us to a massive and imposing stone fortress under a gray, stormy sky. A muscular man with graying hair notices someone approaching the area and asks in surprise who is out there in the middle of the rain. Seeing the mysterious young man standing before him, the man asks if he really came to that fortress to become a mercenary. With a gaze full of determination and showing no signs of hesitation, the boy answers yes in a very firm manner. He then introduces himself using his new war code name and says that from that day on, he only goes by Keisha, leaving his past completely behind. He spent 10 long years surviving on the battlefield and swinging his sword with relentless ferocity, constantly wandering from one conflict zone to another. He eventually became known far and wide as the feared sword demon. That entire terrifying reputation was, in truth, the only secret left of that fragile boy who was once named Elric now. He watches the golden horizon after the end of yet another violent clash, reflecting on his long path of conflict. Despite his fierce reputation, his gaze still carries a deep melancholy regarding the lonely path he chose to follow. In the distance, a massive enemy troop begins to move into battle formation for the next inevitable assault. However, the fearless warrior positions himself completely alone in the canyon to face the advancing enemy army. He wields his heavy, gleaming blade, which shines brightly against the last rays of the setting sun. In the blink of an eye, the warrior executes a swift and overwhelming movement, taking down the enemies with precise strikes. With his face stained, Kasha keeps a cold expression, totally focused on his own survival in the middle of the chaos. The story then takes us inside a bustling tavern, packed with people chatting happily about the latest events. The owner of the establishment looks up in surprise toward the entrance upon hearing the door chime ring softly. He quickly gives a warm welcome to the new customer, who just walked in carrying a walking cane. It is Elric, who now wears ordinary civilian clothes and uses a cane to get around due to past injuries, walking with a serious expression and a visible limp. He crosses the room in silence under the watchful and curious eyes of several patrons drinking nearby. A few regulars recognize him immediately and begin to whisper about whether he is the legendary sword demon who had gone missing from the distant battlefields. They seem shocked and wonder if the feared warrior ended up suffering some permanent leg injury to be in such a weakened state. Elric approaches the counter, and the bartender, worried about his condition, asks what happened that was serious enough to leave him limping like that. The young man plays down the situation, explaining it was just a minor battle incident, something the bartender considers quite common in the life of any veteran fighter. While grabbing a newspaper to read, the young man calmly comments that he will have to live with this physical limitation for a good while. Suddenly, Elric grips the newspaper with extreme force as he comes across a shocking and unexpected piece of news on the page he was reading. The tavern owner notices the sudden, drastic change in his customer's mood and calls out to him, startled by that sudden burst of silent anger. But the young man is completely frozen, his eyes wide with pure disbelief as he focuses on the newspaper article. The news carried the portrait and name of his late father, Hovan Portman, formerly printed in the obituary section. Shortly after, the loud screech of a steam train whistle echoes through the mountains under the golden light of the evening. The locomotive travels swiftly along the tracks as it cuts through the beautiful mountainous landscape of that peaceful region. Sitting comfortably inside his cabin, Elric thoughtfully watches the vastness passing quickly outside the train window. He reflects bitterly on how his late father's face was printed in such a small, forgotten corner of that newspaper page. The official announcement confirmed the passing of Hovan Portman, the person who caused the most painful and traumatic marks in his entire past. Elric remembers when he ran away from home at 14 years old, and how, deep down in his soul, he still held on to the naive hope that his father would look for him somehow. He admits that because he was just a scared, immature kid at the time, that was a childish feeling that did not make much practical sense. However, even looking back today, he still thinks that tiny shred of hope was not entirely baseless in his childhood mind. After all, despite being treated as nothing more than a tool for business and his father being indirectly to blame for his mother's loss, an inevitable bond still existed between the two. He knows that no matter how much he tried to deny everything with his immense grudge, at the end of the day, he was still that man's blood heir. In some corner of his bitter heart, the boy desperately wished his father had shown at least a single drop of genuine affection for him before the end. But he knows that was just a childish illusion, and now that the man is gone, the very target of his resentment has simply ceased to exist in the world. He feels that today, all that is left is a cowardly version of himself using his father's passing as a mere excuse to quietly slip back to his childhood home. With a heart full of regrets and a deep emptiness in his chest, the warrior hears the train brakes screech as it approaches his old hometown. The train finally stops at its final destination at Weeben Station, the exact place where his entire story of hardship began, 10 years ago. The wind blows gently through the immense and shimmering fields of golden wheat under the reddish evening sky. Elric steps onto the platform and takes a deep breath of his old land's air, looking very melancholy and distant from everything. He walks slowly along the dirt road between the wheat fields, noticing that absolutely nothing has changed around there after an entire decade of absence. The streets remain peaceful and painted with the characteristic reddish hue of dry autumn leaves falling silently from the trees. He sees the locals working on the harvest without any rush in a setting that seems extremely welcoming, yet at the same time very detached from his violent reality of war. The village's tranquil atmosphere shows no trace of that unbearable life or death tension he faced daily on the battlefields. He continues his slow walk, marking the rhythm with the steady, heavy sound of his limping steps hitting the dirt ground. Suddenly, a light, cool breeze touches his face, bringing him an instant sense of peace and a faint smile to his lips after such a long time. The immense wheat fields, which were always the biggest symbol of the Weeben family estate, remain completely untouched by the passage of time. This golden view brings back the happy memories of his youth, when he used to play hide-and-seek casually with the other boys in the village. He also fondly remembers getting scolded by the housekeepers for coming back with his clothes all covered in dirt after his daily adventures. With every new step taken on that rustic road, the memories of the past seem to resurface before his eyes with stunning clarity and vividness. He mutters thoughtfully about the power of these memories, trying to understand the conflicting feelings they still stir up in his wounded chest. But the warrior's slow steps are suddenly cut short when he spots something unexpected further ahead on the dusty trail. The young man focuses his sharp gaze toward a few female voices that begin to echo softly from the middle of the wheat field. He cannot help but think of the sweet lady Tyria and wonder if she managed to live a good, happy life during all those years he was away. Elric smiles wryly to himself, imagining that someone so beautiful and graceful has surely already been courted and married to a fine, high-class partner. It is at that exact moment that he notices an extremely delicate hand gently touching the golden stalks of wheat very close to where he is standing. His eyes widen in absolute shock as he hears a maid's voice call out Tyria's name loudly from the middle of the field. He turns around, trembling, and sees, just a few yards away, Tyria herself carrying a bundle of harvested wheat, while a maid runs over anxiously trying to help her with the weight. The maid is startled to notice the presence of that stranger with a cane watching them, and turns toward Elric with a puzzled and apprehensive expression. Elric watches the young lady closely, almost unable to believe he is standing before Tyria again after so much time. At that moment, the maid runs over, calling out anxiously for her lady as she hurries along. The young man gets extremely confused, wondering how on earth she could still be living so simply on that farm. He is completely disbelieving of the whole situation. Elric asks why she is still there. Tyria, feeling a bit flustered, answers that the reason she is still there is because she is still his lawful wife by law. Upon hearing that calm statement, the young man feels like the biggest fool in the world for all his reckless actions during his youth. He realizes how naive he was to believe that forced marriage would simply be annulled by his sudden disappearance. After all, if that arranged union could be undone so easily, she never would have been sold to his family in the first place. He questions whether his selfish actions in the past ended up trapping and stealing away the very last drop of freedom from that poor woman. The young man realizes that, at the end of the day, he was incapable of acting maturely and doing right by the people around him. He understands that he failed miserably at protecting his own pride, and worse yet, at providing any kind of support or respect to the woman he had married. He sees himself as nothing more than a coward for running away from his family responsibilities in such a childish manner. While he spent 10 years fighting and swinging his sword aimlessly on battlefields, she endured all the consequences in silence. He wonders how lonely, difficult, and painful her life must have been throughout all those years of total abandonment in the mansion. Although he feels an urgent need to ask for her forgiveness for everything, the young man begins to doubt his own true intentions. He questions whether he even has the right to do so, and if she would really be willing to accept apologies from someone who left her behind, completely awkward and deeply embarrassed. The young man tries to stammer out a few words to try and start a conversation. Tyria just watches him in absolute silence, keeping a calm and unreadable expression under her large straw hat. Showing no signs of irritation, she practically suggests that the two of them head inside the house to talk things over better. Next, she begins to walk calmly back toward the mansion, allowing him to follow right behind her on the dirt road. Elric accompanies her in silence, feeling extremely tense and uncomfortable with all that unexpected calmness on her part. Deep down, he desperately wished she would at least get upset or yell at him for all the suffering he caused. After all, her extreme indifference seemed to hide a hurt far worse than any sudden burst of anger. As they walk toward the large estate under the reddish sky, he keeps questioning what truly awaits him from here on out. Suddenly, he notices movement coming from the house entrance and turns quickly with a surprised look. The young man's eyes widen as he spots a very familiar figure stepping out of the mansion's main door. Tyria keeps moving toward the entrance, while the young man stays a bit further back on the dirt road due to his injured leg. She notices his obvious hesitation, stops her steps, and asks gently if he isn't going to join her inside. Caught off guard by the unexpected gentleness in her voice, Elric swallows hard and tries to quickly compose himself from the surprise. He replies that he is on his way and grips his cane firmly, quickening his awkward pace to try and catch up with her. They finally step into the imposing mansion, and one of the young maids politely asks them to wait a moment while she goes to call the butler. Tyria waits patiently in the entrance hall, still holding tight to the bundle of golden wheat she harvested from the field. The young maid quickly leaves the area, opening the large interior doors to carry out the order she received. Elric takes advantage of the brief moment of silence to closely observe the luxurious environment around him. He is impressed to realize that, even after 10 years away, the inside of the grand mansion remains absolutely identical to how it was before. Every single small decorative detail of the place evokes deep, nostalgic memories of his turbulent childhood spent inside those walls. Even the exact number of windows and the location of every single mark on the walls come to his mind with stunning clarity. Faced with so much nostalgia and realizing that time seems to have simply frozen there, the young man lets out a faint, quiet smile. However, his moment of reflection is suddenly cut short when a firm female voice asks who he is. Elric turns in surprise toward that stern voice that sounds extremely familiar to his childhood ears. An elegant woman wearing glasses and formal housekeeper attire approaches slowly and seriously, questions whom he came to visit. The young man is in absolute shock as he recognizes that the woman before him is none other than Rhonda, his trusted old housekeeper. He notices that even after an entire decade, she has changed absolutely nothing about her stern appearance and flawless posture. With a slight smile on his lips, the young man asks casually if she really can't recognize him. Rhonda watches him very intently, visibly confused by such an intimate question coming from a complete stranger with a cane. However, as she focuses her eyes on the young man's striking features, she finally realizes who he is, and her eyes widen in complete shock of recognition. Rhonda is completely stunned and stammers out the title of young master while watching the young man smile back affectionately. With trembling hands and tears in her eyes, she asks if that man before her is truly her dear boy Elric. He hugs her warmly and says softly that it has been a very long time and he is finally back home. Holding back her tears, the dedicated housekeeper gets emotional as she confirms that the young man she helped raise has returned safe and sound. She comments in amazement that he changed so much in these 10 years that it became almost impossible to recognize him at first glance. The young man smiles gently and agrees that he really changed a lot during that time, making that reaction perfectly understandable. But suddenly, an extremely intriguing thought hits Elric's mind, leaving him thoughtful and confused. He remembers perfectly when Tyria stated moments ago that she remained on the farm because she was his lawful wife. The young man reflects on the fact that he is now a rugged man who spent 10 years fighting on bloody battlefields. Rhonda notices his sudden distraction and asks worriedly if there is anything wrong happening with him. At that moment, he concludes that his appearance changed so much that even the housekeeper, who cared for him like a mother, had immense difficulty identifying him at first. Knowing this, the young man wonders how it could be possible for his bride to know who he was without any hesitation whatsoever. Sweat drips down his forehead as he tries to crack this great mystery surrounding Tyria's behavior. He simply cannot understand how the young lady was able to recognize his face at first sight after being away for so long. Time passes, and the scene changes to the interior of a luxurious mansion bedroom, where white curtains sway gently in the wind. Tyria appears standing in front of a massive glass window, silently watching the beautiful evening landscape. She closely follows the conversation between Elric and the housekeeper, taking place right below in the property garden. The young man feels like he is being watched from above, turns quickly, and ends up blushing quite a bit at the situation. Upon realizing she was caught spying, the young lady steps back startled and brings her hand to her chest, her heart racing. She tries to catch her breath while leaning against the wall, her face turning completely red from embarrassment. The story then highlights the large, distinct scar that Elric carries on the back of his neck, along with focusing on his long brown hair and his deep gaze that carries the marks of past hardships to Tyria. Absolutely nothing seemed to have changed about the essence and the gaze of that boy she knew so well in childhood. Later, Elric relaxes in a luxurious hot bath, but he still remains puzzled by the mystery of the recognition. While taking his bath, he tries to find some plausible explanation for how his wife could identify him so easily after 10 years. He finally decides to step out of the warm water, making a soft splashing sound as his feet hit the damp floor of the bathhouse. The young man puts on his white robe and begins to tie the belt, but gets a big scare as he hears the door suddenly open. He turns his face confused, his eyes widening at the unexpected presence appearing right in front of him. It is Tyria, who calmly enters the room wearing only a white towel wrapped around her body after her own bath. Upon realizing his presence right there in the same private space, her cheeks instantly turn red with embarrassment. Desperate over the surprise encounter, the girl tries to cover herself up more and begins to stammer out several apologies for the misunderstanding. Seeing that she is on the verge of tears from pure embarrassment, Elric tries to quickly calm her down so she doesn't panic. He gestures nervously and asks her not to shed tears over that awkward situation, but the tense, shy mood between the two newlyweds only seems to grow with every passing second of silence in that steamy room. To make matters worse, a young red-haired maid opens the door holding a laundry basket and lets out a deafening shriek upon seeing the private scene. In complete panic at the situation, the maid drops everything on the floor and runs away as fast as she can through the mansion hallways. She screams desperately for help outside, completely unable to comprehend what on earth is happening inside that room. In an extremely quick reaction to protect his wife from curious eyes, Elric pulls Tyria close and holds her firmly. However, this sudden and unexpected physical contact leaves both of their faces even redder from pure embarrassment. With eyes full of tears from the scare, the young lady can only stammer her maid's name in a panic. Trying to smooth things over any way he can, the young man tries to make up a flimsy excuse that he only held her so she wouldn't slip on the wet floor. The story then transports us back to the dark times of conflict at the Chevor defense line, where the 5th Guard Regiment is stationed. One of the fearless fighters watches the horizon with a sharp, relentless gaze in the middle of the heavy rain that pours down. From the enemy side emerges the feared vanguard knight of the Imperial Army, LeBron, leading the elite assault group with a grim smile on his face. With battle cries echoing from all sides, the troops receive orders to charge with everything to crush the local defense forces. LeBron taunts his opponents at the top of his lungs, raising his massive sword and promising he will cut every single one of them down without mercy. In an extremely brutal assault, the powerful enemy commander begins to take down several guards at once, spilling blood on the wet earth. Desperate in the face of such a massive gap in power, the surviving soldiers shout that it is impossible to defeat that armored warrior. With no other viable option to prevent a total wipeout, the officers order an immediate retreat of all units back behind the defensive line. But going against all that widespread panic, the fearless Kasha calmly walks toward the danger with his heavy sword resting on his shoulder. The enemy soldiers watch the mysterious warrior from a distance and wonder if he is just another insignificant mercenary hired by Shavor. Completely oblivious to the opponent's whispers, the young man takes his battle stance and raises his heavy sword. Kasha keeps his gaze cold and focused on the opponents, showing stunning calmness ahead of the imminent battle. Without wasting any time, one of the bold Imperial soldiers charges fiercely in his direction, with his sword raised and a cruel smile on his face. However, the Proto blocks the attack with absolute ease and already prepares to deliver a devastating counterstrike. He grips his massive blade with absolute firmness, keeping an unbothered expression as he dominates the clash. With a precise and lethal movement, he strikes the enemy's neck, causing blood to spray heavily in the middle of the rain. The wounded soldier drops his weapon and falls to his knees on the ground, completely defeated by the young man's overwhelming power. Kasha spins his sword quickly and takes down the opponent with a single clean, relentless strike. The soldier's bloodied helmet rolls through the mud right in front of his comrades, spreading panic among the Imperial troops. The other soldiers watching the scene freeze in pure terror and begin to break into a cold sweat before that monstrous strength. Standing beside the fallen body, the warrior solemnly introduces himself as Kasha, the legendary mercenary knight of Chevor. He challenges the remaining enemies to step forward if they have the courage, promising he will cut down every last one of them without a second thought. But suddenly, a shiver runs down his spine as he senses a lethal threat rapidly approaching. The Proto reacts in that exact instant and activates his mana shield to try and protect himself from the surprise attack. However, a powerful projectile bursts through his protective barrier with violence and hits his left knee dead on, feeling excruciating pain. The young man falls to his knees and uses his own sword as support to keep from collapsing on the bloody ground. Kasha grinds his teeth and looks up with great difficulty, trying to identify the source of that devastating shot. At the top of a nearby cliff, two mysterious silhouettes silently watch the battle unfold down below. It is a duo wearing eccentric clothing and masks, where the woman holds a sniper rifle that is still smoking. The young man wakes up with a start, his eyes wide open, letting out a gasp of pure panic after reliving that terrible nightmare. Elric sits up quickly in bed, bathed in a cold sweat and holding a knife defensively against the empty air. He breathes heavily with his heart racing, still trying to break free from the traumatic memories of the war. The young man looks at the knife in his trembling hands, while trying to get his bearings and calm his battle instincts. Little by little, the sunlight flooding the grand and luxurious bedroom begins to bring a sense of reality back to the space. He finally realizes that he is no longer on the battlefield and that he managed to return home safely. Suddenly, knocks on the door startle him, causing him to point his weapon toward the noise out of pure reflex. From the outside, a polite voice asks if the young master is awake yet, while he remains tense on the massive bed. Elric hesitates for a brief moment and stays quiet, trying to control his uneven breathing before answering. He finally answers in a restrained manner that, yes, confirming he is awake. While saying he just woke up, the young man quickly hides the knife behind his back to avoid raising any suspicion. One of the dedicated maids enters the room, bringing a wooden basin full of water so he can wash up. The Proto remembers that as soon as he asked for cold water to clean himself, a basin overflowing with freezing water was delivered to him without delay. He gets dressed in incredibly soft and comfortable clothes, feeling as though he is wearing almost nothing compared to the heavy armor from before. Looking at himself in the mirror while leaning on his cane, Elric reflects that living surrounded by so much luxury feels like a reward he doesn't deserve. The young man tries to force a smile at his own reflection, but the resulting expression feels strange and unnatural to him. He begins to walk slowly and wonders if all that time of hardship on the battlefield ended up turning his face to stone. Housekeeper Rhonda opens the door and praises the young master's look, next suggesting they start the day with a good breakfast. She stands with her usual flawless and elegant posture, waiting for him to join her. Noticing the young man's limping walk, the housekeeper asks worriedly what happened to his leg, and he makes up a lie that he ended up falling down a steep hill out of pure distraction. In his mind, the Prota remembers how he was wounded in the war and recognizes that he could never reveal a bullet remained lodged in his knee. To avoid causing unnecessary worry, Rhonda comments playfully that he is still just as accident-prone as he used to be, making the young man laugh awkwardly as he remembers the embarrassing misunderstanding from the day before. As the two walk through the mansion hallways, soft footsteps begin to echo, and a highly anticipated figure emerges toward them. The delicate profile and long golden hair of the young bride are revealed under the soft light coming through the windows. Tyria appears before him looking stunning and sweetly asks if he managed to get a good night's sleep. However, the sight of his wife instantly makes the young man remember the moment he saw her stepping out of the bath, wrapped only in a towel. Completely embarrassed and with a red face, he can barely form a proper answer after being called a creep because of that incident. The young maid Marie points her finger dramatically and yells that he is a total degenerate, while Tyria stands looking very flustered in the background, losing her patience with that scene. Rhonda smacks Marie hard on the head and scolds her severely for spying on someone else's bathhouse. While dragging the noisy maid away from there by the collar, the housekeeper politely wishes the young man a pleasant stay in the mansion. Feeling a bit uncomfortable with the chaotic welcome, Elric clears his throat to try and clear the heavy air. He forces a friendly smile and wishes his wife a good morning, casually commenting that he managed to sleep very well. While observing the cozy dining room environment, the young man notices Marie's absence and asks the new maid's name since he didn't remember her from his last visit. However, he almost chokes on what he was eating and slams his hand on the table out of pure surprise when Tyria mentions the incident where the maid called him a creep. Desperate to drop the subject, the Prota gestures frantically with his hands and insists that she doesn't need to worry about that. He rests his hand firmly on the handle of his cane, trying to regain his composure in the face of the awkward situation. With a visibly flushed face, Elric tries to explain himself by saying it was just a silly curiosity because he had never seen the girl before. Tyria glares at him with narrowed, extremely sharp eyes, seemingly not entirely convinced by that rushed excuse. An awkward silence quickly settles over the room as the couple begins to eat breakfast side by side. The young bride enjoys her meal peacefully and chews calmly, seemingly oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. Suddenly, she opens her mouth to bring up a sensitive topic, instantly putting the young man on high alert. Taking the hint, Elric takes the initiative and decides to address the terrible misunderstanding from the day before. Once and for all, Tyria asks shyly if he is referring to what happened in the bathhouse, feeling her cheeks heat up right then and there. The young man tries to stammer out a formal apology, but she quickly cuts him off with a nervous gesture to end the conversation. Still quite flustered, the young lady only asks him to focus on eating and finish up his breakfast quickly. Tyria looks away and squeezes her own dress with trembling hands, completely embarrassed by that entire private situation. She remains in absolute silence with a blushing face, unable to look her husband directly in the eyes. Feeling the mood get heavier and heavier, the Prota scratches the back of his neck and mentally curses his own idea to bring the subject up. He remembers how he was dressed in only a robe in the bathhouse and realizes he ended up exposing way too much. Elric remembers bitterly the countless deep scars covering his body, wondering to himself if she ended up shocked by the marks of his violent past in the war. The two continue eating in an almost deafening silence, where only the sound of silverware against plates can be heard. The young man deeply regrets not simply ignoring what happened, feeling that the awkward atmosphere is going to drive them both crazy. To escape from there as quickly as possible, he begins to stuff food into his mouth in an extremely rushed and almost desperate manner, with his cheeks totally full. The young man quickly wipes his mouth while his wife watches him in complete shock at that sudden lack of manners. Giving a thumbs-up sign, the young man announces with a full mouth that he is already on his way out and wishes her a good rest of her meal. He stands up quickly and leaves the dining room, clicking the wooden door shut right behind him. Tyria watches the closed door for a few moments and lets out a shy sigh at her husband's unexpected behavior. With her face still red, she looks out the sunny window and mentally wishes him a pleasant day. Upon stepping into the main hall after breakfast, Elric notices that the massive Portman estate is already in full swing and packed with working servants. Under the watchful guidance of housekeeper Rhonda, the young man goes around greeting each of the house employees, who welcome him with sincere smiles and a lot of warmth. However, one of the servants boldly asks if it's true that he tried to make a move on the lady yesterday, causing another employee to scold him by saying the two are married and praising the young master's virility. Suddenly, young Marie emerges furious in the middle of the hallway and yells at the top of her lungs that the Prota is nothing but a huge creep. She rants indignantly for all the other employees to get a grip and stop defending the young man's shady behavior. The young maid continues her scene, saying he vanished for 10 years only to come back with this kind of behavior, but she is cut off when a firm hand grips her shoulder. It is elderly Aldio, who appears smiling and asks her not to be so harsh on the young master, since she is still way too young to understand these things. The experienced employee explains naturally that the main duty of any noble is to secure a legitimate heir for the family lineage. Aldio argues enthusiastically that Elric was merely faithfully fulfilling his marital obligations in the bathhouse, and that he proved to be a true noble by not forgetting his duties even after a decade away. The young man feels completely mortified by the embarrassing conversation, while Marie keeps shouting protests that he is the worst kind of pervert. The friendly old man ignores the girl's protests and asks expectantly if the young master has finally returned home for good, making Elric let out a very awkward laugh. Squeezing the handle of his cane tightly, the proto reflects in silence that, in truth, he still hasn't made any decision about his future. He knows the severe injury to his knee will force him to stay in the mansion for some time, but he questions how he could act as the rightful lord of that beautiful property surrounded by golden wheat fields after being away for so many years, trying to change the subject. Elric mentions he needs to take care of some errands now, and that they will talk more later, receiving a respectful nod from Aldio, who celebrates his return. Next, the young master orders the experienced employee to prepare the carriage for his immediate departure. A short time later, the vehicle begins to move smoothly along the dirt road that cuts through the vast golden fields of the farm. From the middle of the wheat field, Tyria silently watches the carriage slowly distance itself toward the property exit. She holds her large straw hat against the day's gentle breeze, keeping a thoughtful and melancholy gaze as she watches the horizon. Seen from above, the carriage follows its lonely path along the road surrounded by the vibrant autumn colors covering the region. The vehicle finally stops at an isolated spot on the hill, and Elric steps down to walk slowly with the help of his cane. The young man watches the silent landscape with an expression heavy with melancholy and mutters to himself that it really has been a very long time. He stops before the imposing stone grave of Hovan Portman and whispers the word father with deep sadness, staring at the tombstone under the bright light of the sky. Before the tombstone, the proto reflects silently that he used to carry a deep resentment toward his late father. However, he confesses that he never wished for their reunion to happen in such a cold and melancholy way. Hovan Portman had been an extremely determined man who raised the family lineage from mere merchants to the most important guild in Wibben, but his relentless coldness also earned him countless enemies throughout his life. The young man wonders if his father ever directed a sincere smile or a single affectionate word to him, concluding that he should have lived a little longer if he wanted to maintain his villainous stance until the end. He fixes his eyes on the crest, carved into the funeral monument, and silently laments that his father departed so soon. With a faint sigh, Elric decides to look away from the grave and prepares to turn his back on that place under the blue sky. The young man admits to himself that he no longer carries the bitterness and grudge of the past that used to plague his heart. The young man then turns around slowly and calls out to Aldio, who was waiting patiently a bit further back. He asks directly how his father passed away, and the loyal employee answers that the cause was a severe heart condition that struck him down. Elric is surprised to learn that the deceased hid the truth about his health condition until the very end, leaving only his personal doctor and Aldio himself aware of the situation. The employee continues the account, explaining that upon realizing his final days were near, Hovan dedicated all his strength to closing and liquidating his businesses. With a slight ironic smile, the young man comments that he finds the employee a curious figure and asks what he saw in such a cold man to maintain such loyalty. Without hesitating, Aldio smiles back and answers humorously that he did it all for the money, questioning what other reason he could possibly have. The proto glares at him with suspicion and notes that he still hasn't asked him the most important question of all. He is referring to the destination of all the assets and wealth that the deceased quickly liquidated. Before his early passing, the young man keeps a serious expression while awaiting the revelation about the whereabouts of the family's immense fortune. The elderly employee then reveals that the entire inheritance accumulated by the father was left completely to him, the rightful heir. The carriage resumes its pace and moves slowly along the dirt road, cutting through the beautiful forest filled with autumn leaves, already settled inside the vehicle. Elric asks the driver if his father really didn't leave any formal written will. Aldio answers that the deceased wasn't the type to do something like that, and confirms there are only a few written instructions regarding the division, offering to show them if he is curious. Gripping his cane firmly, the young man listens to the employee admit that the true intentions of the deceased remain a great mystery to everyone. The driver adds that the matter was handled with a coldness never before seen by the old boss, leaving the proto quite thoughtful. While the carriage crosses the golden field, the old man advises the young man to take all the necessary time to reflect on the destination of the inheritance. The young man focuses his sharp gaze on the landscape and begins to connect the dots about his family's current situation. An intriguing question arises in his mind as he watches the wheat field through the vehicle window. Elric wonders for what reason his wife still remains in the mansion. Since the arranged marriage should have been annulled after his long 10-year absence, Aldio comments from the outside that the marriage was purely political, functioning as a commercial transaction disguised as a union between two noble families. The young man questions if that fact would be enough justification, but he is interrupted by the old man, who remembers a very important detail he had forgotten to mention. He reveals that the Portman lineage has now risen to the title of a hereditary barony, and that this prestigious honor will be transferred to the young man as soon as he takes over the inheritance. The employee emphasizes that the entire fortune belongs exclusively to him by right, and not to the young lady living on the property. The carriage finally parks in front of the main entrance of the family's grand and luxurious mansion. Upon stepping down from the transport, Elric reflects that if money were Tyria's only motivation, she would have left a long time ago, considering an entire year has passed since his father's passing. He concludes that if she wanted to, the young lady could have claimed the fortune as an attorney and departed from there, which proves that her stay on the property was an entirely personal choice. The young master asks the driver if he knows the reason that led his wife to make such an unusual decision. Aldio sighs and explains that the young lady is an extremely private woman, confessing they were never close enough to share personal confidences. He describes the bride as a person of haughty nobility and difficult to approach, making it impossible for a simple servant to question her motives. Elric agrees that she seems to be someone complicated to deal with, and points out that she is still a complete stranger to him, since the two have only ever met in person once. The old man gives the horse a light pat and ponders wisely that in truth, practically every marriage of convenience starts exactly that way. The young man begins to climb the stone steps with difficulty, leaning the full weight of his injured body on his cane. At the top of the stairs, he runs into Tyria leaning against one of the imposing pillars, looking quite shy at his approach. The girl hides her blushing face under the brim of her large hat, showing the obvious embarrassment she still feels in her husband's presence. She squeezes her own hands tightly against her dress, revealing her extreme shyness and internal fluster with the sudden encounter. With hesitant steps, the young bride begins to walk slowly toward the house entrance. Noticing her presence, Elric takes the initiative and asks gently if she just returned from her walk. Surprised by the approach, Tyria blushes heavily and asks in surprise when it was that the young man arrived from his trip. She holds a small bag of wheat and shyly explains she just got back from her routine work in the fields. The Prota feels his own face heat up with the physical proximity of his wife and tries to hide his massive nervousness before her. He friendly suggests that the two of them head inside the mansion together, and the young lady immediately agrees with a slight nod of her head. The couple proceeds to climb the luxurious grand staircase inside side by side, maintaining a silence loaded with shyness and tension. Elric watches her out of the corner of his eye while mentally cursing his own mouth for always creating extremely strange and awkward dialogue walking beside Tyria. Elric notices that even dressed in simple work clothes, she carries an innate and extremely elegant air of nobility. He finds himself thinking if the girl already possessed that striking and haughty presence 10 years ago when they got married. The young man vaguely remembers the image of his bride on their wedding day, when she looked like a shy and radiant young noblewoman. Suddenly, a loud noise brings him back to reality and makes him jump in surprise in the middle of his thoughts. Due to his injured leg, the Prota ends up tripping awkwardly and startles his wife, who asks worriedly if he is okay. Elric slams his cane against the ground hard to regain his balance and avoid an embarrassing fall. He forces a tight smile and lies, saying he is doing great, claiming his legs just failed for a moment due to the long walk, while wondering to himself how long she had been watching him walk in that limping way. The young man apologizes for not being able to carry the bag of wheat for her due to his injured leg as they continue up the stairs. Tyria answers that it's totally fine and that she already got used to it, which makes the Prota feel quite embarrassed and awkward for having abandoned his wife for so long, and now offering late apologies. The young bride stares at him with her striking sharp eyes, conveying a calm and deep seriousness in her gaze. She explains she meant she got used to the hard work because she learned everything directly from the late patriarch of the Portman family. Surprised by the revelation, Elric mutters that acting strictly and demanding the maximum from others was indeed his late father's signature style. The young man recalls that the patriarch Hovan Portman was a relentless man who made a point to personally inspect every single sector of his businesses, including the vast wheat fields. He reflects that since his father had liquidated all other ventures, leaving only that farm, it was perfectly natural that he had transferred the entire management of the lands to Tyria. The steps of both finally go quiet when the two stop their climb and halt at the top of the mansion hallway with a serious face. Elric hesitates for a moment before bringing up a very personal topic with the girl. Standing right before the imposing portrait of the patriarch Hovan, the young man asks out of curiosity how his father's days were before he passed away. Tyria answers in a cold and direct manner that she only learned the farm services from him, confessing she remembers almost nothing other than professional obligations. Upon hearing his wife's distant answer, the Prota squeezes the handle of his wooden cane with even more force. He builds up the courage and asks if, by any chance, his father ever happened to mention his name or ask about him during all that time. The girl answers in a short and simple manner that no, leaving the young man with a slight sad smile on his lips at the confirmation of his father's coldness. He reflects silently that it was a peculiar combination of an unfeeling father with a woman of few words, making any dialogue between them purely business-related. The young man looks away and accepts the sad reality about the distant relationship he kept with his late father. Tyria asks to be excused to head back to her daily duties, leaving the young man confused as he believed she had already wrapped up her work for the day. She clarifies that she still needs to review all the office paperwork, causing Elric to be amazed by the amount of obligations under her responsibility. The young master asks in surprise if she really takes care of the wheat farm during the day and still reviews bureaucratic documents at night, and she shyly confirms yes. The girl says goodbye, mentioning she will see him again only at dinner time, and he merely nods in silence as he watches her walk away. The young man remains motionless in the hallway, following his wife's departure with a gaze heavy with distress. At that instant, Elric is flooded by a deep sense of guilt upon realizing that entire workload should be his responsibility. Feeling ashamed for having lived selfishly while she suffered in his place, he reflects that his conscience would be much lighter if she at least showed some grudge or resentment against him, but the girl never uttered a single word of complaint during all these years, feeling the weight of his thoughts. The proto begins to limp slowly toward the mansion office. Suddenly, a loud crash coming from a side hallway catches his attention and makes him stop immediately. He runs into the clumsy Marie fallen on the floor after tripping and dropping a wooden box full of old letters, leaving her in complete despair. Marie cries, not knowing what to do in the face of all that mess, while the young man watches her with a confused expression. He kneels down to help her gather the scattered paperwork and takes the chance to ask what all those sealed letters are about. The servant answers. They are old letters sent to her lady, causing Elric to pick up one of the envelopes to analyze it more closely. The young master is quite impressed to notice the enormous amount of mail kept in that box. However, the young man's expression changes instantly, and his eyes widen as he recognizes the sender of one of the letters. He realizes the letters were sent by the Wibbin family, recalling the terms of the political marriage agreement that sealed Tyria's fate. The prota opens the letter and begins to closely read the content written by the young lady's father. In the text, Baron Wibbin urges his daughter to give up waiting for a husband who will never return and come back home, even offering a new marriage to spare her from further suffering. Elric realizes his father had transferred the entire family fortune to his name, leaving his daughter-in-law without a single penny, even after 10 years of exclusive dedication to the Portman property. He rests the letter on the wooden office desk, recognizing that if his wife had taken the entire inheritance for herself, it would be nothing more than a fair payment for her years of effort. The young man sits at the desk and rests his head in his hands, questioning if the true reason Tyria stayed there was just to preserve the legacy left by her late father-in-law. However, he still cannot understand why she dedicated herself so much to a cause that would yield her no financial reward. Elric remains seated in the luxurious office chair, completely focused on trying to figure out his wife's true intentions. He focuses his deep, sharp eyes on the empty space, determined to find the answers he seeks about the girl's behavior. He concludes that if her goal were purely material inheritance, she would have already taken possession of all the assets and departed from the mansion about a year ago, right after the patriarch's passing. The young man leans over the documents scattered on the desk. Trying to crack the mystery surrounding the young lady's devotion, he opens one of the desk drawers and comes across a pile of stored letters, silently concluding that his suspicions were correct. The young man analyzes the mail and notices that the letters sent by the Wibbin family began to arrive exactly 1 year ago. He notes that all the messages had the same goal of collecting the inheritance his father had kept for him, and notices his wife likely never replied to any of them. Since the latest letters practically begged for an answer, Elric lets out a long sigh mixed with a bitter smile in the face of that entire surprising situation. He realizes Tyria was faithfully protecting the Portman family wealth for an heir whose return was uncertain and never guaranteed. Knowing that not even the loyal driver Aldio knew about the existence of those collections from the bride's family, the young man concludes the girl must have made a tremendous effort to hide the whole truth. The proto realizes with regret that his wife had been facing that difficult battle completely alone throughout the entire previous year. He watches Tyria working from afar in the fields and recognizes the impressive strength and determination of that very private young lady. The young master reflects that he wouldn't have the slightest right to blame her if she had simply taken the fortune for herself, mentally questioning why she chose to walk a path of so many hardships. Meanwhile, in her private quarters, the young lady settles before the vanity and begins to get ready for the meeting requested by her husband. She delicately styles her blonde hair and clips a light satin ribbon bow at the back of her head. Wearing an elegant dark blue dress with lace details, Tyria watches her own reflection in the mirror with a very serious and thoughtful expression. Suddenly, young maid Marie pops into the room, her cheeks red with excitement as she celebrates that the moment has finally arrived. The servant joins her hands together and yells enthusiastically that the young master finally took the initiative to request a private meeting with his wife. The girl makes a funny face and grumbles that although his behavior in the bathhouse was unforgivable, she remembers the words of wisdom from butler Aldio. Marie loudly insists that giving an heir to the family would also be wonderful for the lady herself, leaving Tyria completely red and confused by such boldness. Unable to contain her exaggerated excitement, the maid begins to jump with joy around the room with little skipping steps. She suddenly lunges forward and grabs the skirt of her lady's luxurious blue dress with a lot of force. Kneeling on the rug, Marie dramatically begs for her lady to follow the experienced butler's recommendations. The maid sheds theatrical tears and warns that the young man is a shameless rogue who might run away from home at any moment since he abandoned her in the past, insisting the best thing to do is for the two to get close once and for all, with a hilarious and over-the-top expression. The servant screams with all her might for the girl to rush to bed with her husband to order a baby right away. Marie begins to make wild plans of having 2 babies identical to her lady to prevent either of them from inheriting the young master's runner and perverted personality, causing a massive cold sweat of embarrassment in Tyria. Luckily for the young lady, firm knocks on the door cut off the clumsy maid's limitless chatter. From the outside, butler Aldio asks politely if she is ready for the appointment, and she quickly answers she is already leaving the room. The firm steps of Tyria and the butler begin to echo through the imposing wooden hallway as they head to the meeting room. The girl walks down the stairs anxiously questioning what the topic of conversation could be, since that was the first time he had requested a private meeting with her, with smooth movements. Aldio holds the golden handles and opens the large double doors for the young lady's entry. The experienced employee solemnly announces the lady's arrival, while Elric waits patiently seated at the table. The young master, who was calmly sipping a cup of tea before the large sunny window, raises his eyes and wishes her a warm welcome. Tyria enters the elegant tea room with calm steps, her face slightly flushed with shyness. The sound of her shoe heels echoes through the room as she approaches the tea table set up to receive them. The young man takes one last sip of his drink in a thoughtful manner while watching his wife settle across from him. Seen from above, the duo positions themselves in the center of the grand room decorated with classic furniture and bathed in sunlight. Getting straight to the point, Elric places the letter on the table and sincerely apologizes for opening the mail without permission, explaining he found them by chance fallen in the middle of the mess made by the maid. He touches the sealed envelope and asks directly if he could question her about the content of those mysterious letters. Tyria's eyes widen, and she lets out a slight gasp of surprise upon realizing her big secret was discovered by her husband. She immediately lowers her head, letting the shadow of her hair cover her face taken by a sudden anguish. In a silent panic, the young lady fears the young man will misunderstand her true intentions and view her as a greedy, unscrupulous woman only interested in the inheritance. The young man breaks the silence by calmly commenting. He found out she spent the entire past year completely ignoring all those collections from her family. He stares at her seriously and confesses he only called her there to get an answer as to why. She protected his inheritance with so much dedication, even without having any guarantee that he would return alive one day. Elric points out she could have easily taken possession of all the wealth for herself without anyone being able to stop her or judge her for it. Deep down, the young man understands that to her, he was nothing more than a complete stranger after a decade of total estrangement. He reflects that the insistence of that unknown young lady to safeguard the assets of an absent husband remained an incomprehensible mystery to his mind. He asks for her to reveal the truth about the reason for refusing to return to her homeland in Weeben, even in the face of her father's insistence. With her face partially shadowed and her lips pressed together, the girl mutters the family surname in a firm and solemn way. She raises her head with determination and declares with her striking, sharp eyes that her official name now is Tyria Portman. The young lady states with pride and authority that she is no longer the Lady of Weeben, but rather the rightful mistress and protector of the entire Portman estate, giving no time for any reply. She abruptly stands up and apologizes for needing to leave in a hurry, as she still has many pending obligations on the farm. The young lady turns her back and walks away with quick and resolute steps through the room, leaving her tea untouched on the table. Elric remains seated in the chair with a drop of sweat on his forehead, completely stunned and speechless before his wife's imposing and unexpected attitude. He silently watches the empty space left by the girl before the sunny window. Trying to digest the impact of that powerful declaration of loyalty, Elric asks his wife why she decided to protect his part of the inheritance, even without having any guarantee that he would one day return alive, pointing out she could have very well kept the entire fortune for herself. Tyria hesitates for a moment and begins to stammer shyly, trying to find the right words to answer her husband's questioning. She swallows hard and gets intensely blushing cheeks while trying to contain her nervousness before the young man. Raising her gaze firmly, the young lady stares at him with her striking, sharp eyes and answers simply that she acted that way because she is his wife. Meanwhile, in the office, Elric holds a small knife and drives it thoughtfully against the wooden paneling of the wall. Seated in his chair, the young master reflects in silence on everything that happened and the true motivations of his partner. He remembers the girl's strong statement asserting that she now belongs to the Portman family and will take the responsibility and duty to protect that property. The sound of the blade hitting the wall echoes through the silent room while he remains lost in his thoughts. Elric wonders if the true feeling hidden behind that cold and formal answer was just the sense of duty of a noble woman. He realizes she protected all the remaining wealth not out of greed, but to fulfill her obligation, an unselfish attitude that instantly makes him remember an old acquaintance from the past. The young man brings to memory the figure of Elvis Graham, a man who deeply marked his military path. Elric recalls he met Elvis on the battlefields as the third son of an influential family that had hired him as a mercenary during a territorial war. Despite securing victory with few casualties, the triumph was not complete, as Elvis ended up suffering severe wounds that left him permanently in a wheelchair. Even unable to fight, the noble maintained a haughty stance and asserted he needed to keep fulfilling his social role. He used to say that those born into nobility carried the burden of setting the example for others, and that the war was just the stage for him to exercise his duty. At the time, Elric even questioned him if it wasn't contradictory to act like that, being just the son of a concubine and half commoner. With a sarcastic smile, Elvis replied that he preferred to see himself as half noble, and that by fulfilling half of his obligations, he ended up sacrificing half of his own body. Fulfilling what he had promised, the man retired from combat to live peacefully and ended up getting married a few years later. Back to reality. The Proto removes the blade from the wooden wall with a firm movement. He mutters to himself about the weight of the words responsibility and duty that seem to guide his wife's actions so much. Although he recognizes he can never repay Tyria's 10 years of sacrifice, the young man knows he is not totally empty-handed before that situation. Aware that the girl's greedy family will keep sending mail collecting the inheritance, he deduces their apparent physical absence is due to some hurdle and not for lack of will. Knowing his wife will never reveal her deepest feelings, even if he presses the matter, Elric decides to act on his own. Fortunately, the young man plans an alternative path to find out the whole truth behind that story once and for all. With that, a carriage travels toward the luxurious estate of the Wibbin family. Elric arrives before the iron gates of the grand house and concludes the best strategy right now is to make a direct approach. The young master walks elegantly through the garden, recognizing the grandeur of the place and feeling confident for the clash that is to come. Meanwhile, on the inside of the residence, the hosts have already been informed of the visit and comment with disdain about the young man's nerve to finally show his face. Baron Wibbin and his wife walk hurriedly through the hallways, spitting venom against their son-in-law and calling him a useless, broke guy of humble origins. The Baroness rants furiously that he should have vanished forever and accuses the young man of returning only to sniff around and steal their daughter's inheritance. With a dark and greedy look, the Baron worries about the possibility of the young man trying to claim his legal rights over the fortune left by Hoven. The noble couple proceeds with quick steps toward the sitting room to confront the unwanted visitor. They walk side by side through the luxurious rooms, determined not to allow the young man to keep the assets of the Portman family. The Baron rants angrily, labeling his son-in-law as a piece of gold-digging trash who only cares about money. His wife fully agrees and adds that the young man wasted an entire decade of Tyria's life, dramatically recalling all the high cost and effort they had to raise the girl. The greedy noble focuses his attention on the valuable inheritance left by the late patriarch of the Portmans. They march resolutely, convinced that they need to confiscate that fortune to make up for all the alleged losses they suffered. With a sudden movement, the Baron grabs the golden handle and opens the meeting room door. Upon entering, they run into Elric, elegantly dressed and leaning on his cane, patiently awaiting the arrival of his in-laws. The young master bows politely and formally introduces himself as Elric Portman, asking for sincere apologies for the long delay in coming to visit them. Sitting at the table with crossed arms, the Baron comments with irony about the 10-year disappearance, while his wife pretends to understand the situation with a fake smile behind her fan. Without wasting time on formalities, the young man directly mentions that he had the opportunity to read the letter sent by them to his mansion. The father-in-law finds it ridiculous that the young man only read the message now, but insists on speeding up the conversation by asserting he sent the letter out of pure fatherly concern for his daughter's abandonment. He accuses Elric of being a shameless rogue for abandoning Tyria after the Wibbin family helped elevate the Portmans to noble status. Greedily mentioning the great inheritance left by the late patriarch, the Baron lets out a mocking laugh and openly insults his son-in-law's humble origins, mocking the fact that he came back crippled and questioning his ability and right to manage any fortune. He clears his throat and says arrogantly that since the inheritance was being managed exclusively by Tyria, the young man clearly has no knack for business. From the other side of the table, the noble couple lays their cards on the table in a direct manner, demanding the delivery of the entire Portman fortune as financial compensation for their daughter's abandonment. The patriarch of the Wabens insists his son-in-law is shameless for wanting to claim the assets and doubts he would give any useful destination to the money inherited from his father. Hiding her greedy smile behind her fan, the Baroness backs her husband and adds that the young man lacks the competence to manage the lands, falsely lamenting her daughter's suffering. With dark and malicious looks, the noble couple concludes the best solution is for them to take total control of the fortune, ensuring they will put every single penny of the inheritance to excellent use. Faced with all those absurd demands, Elric only lets out a long and heavy sigh. He feels his eyes burn with fury and thinks about how repulsive that situation is, realizing that behind all the smooth talk, the only real goal of that couple is to steal the inheritance left by his late father now that Tyria is alone. The young man concludes the two saw the perfect opportunity to strike it rich at the expense of someone else's assets, without caring in the slightest about their own daughter's well-being, while trying to usurp the lands just to line their pockets with gold. Overcome by deep disgust, the young master realizes he can no longer stand to hear even a single word coming from such loathsome people. Elric closes his eyes to take a deep breath and coldly warns that, before anything else, he would like to clarify one point. He stares at them firmly and apologizes for not bringing his wife to that meeting, seriously explaining she is very busy managing the farm tasks at the moment. Baron Joseph Wibben completely loses his patience, slams his hand hard on the table, and yells for his son-in-law to stop trying to change the subject, demanding total focus on the discussion about the division of the inheritance. The man rants furiously for the young man to stop being greedy and hand over the fortune to the two of them already, questioning if he really thinks it's fair to claim these assets after spending 10 long years away from home. In the face of his father-in-law's relentless shouting accusing him of greed, Elric covers his own face and lets out a sarcastic laugh, repeating the word greedy with total contempt. He slowly moves his fingers away, focusing his intense, sharp eyes on the man, and asks in a threatening tone of voice what exactly Joseph intends to do if he decides to act with the mentioned greed. The Baron swallows hard and stammers scared, while his son-in-law intimidatingly repeats the question of what they would do if he resolved to take possession of all the wealth for himself. The young man challenges his father-in-law to say something and reveal what his reaction would be, mocking the fact that the man suddenly went quiet right after shouting with so much arrogance, giving no chances for answers. Elric strikes the table hard and asks sharply if the noble's proud mouth dried up so fast in the face of a real confrontation. The Baron shudders and yells enraged, while calling his son-in-law an insolent scoundrel. The young master stares at him coldly and notes that, by the looks of it, his father-in-law finally understood whom he was actually dealing with. The young man recalls his 10 years of pure survival on the battlefields, remembering there is no need for exaggerated movements or showing foolish fury against weak opponents. He reflects that at the end of the day, nothing will change the final outcome of that situation, regardless of the meaning he tries to give to his own actions. Elric looks deep into the Baron's eyes and advises him to keep his mouth tightly shut from that instant on, warning that would be the best choice if the two still want to keep receiving financial support from Tyria. He lets out a mocking smile and comments on how comical he finds that entire ridiculous scene created by two people who possess absolutely no legal right over his wife's inheritance. The young man stands up, leaning on his cane, and turns his back on the two, authoritatively declaring that the only ones truly consumed by greed there are the in-laws themselves. Joseph shouts out of control behind him, threatening to invade the Portman property to end the young man's life, but Elric merely answers with disdain for the man to feel free to try whatever he wants. Before crossing the large doors, the Prota casts one last terrifying look over his shoulders and warns he will be anxiously waiting for that attempt. A short time later, the young master's carriage begins its return journey, cutting through the dirt roads surrounded by trees under the afternoon light. On the inside of the vehicle, Elric rests his head on his hand and lets out a long sigh of exhaustion. While trying to calm down after the tense confrontation, he begins to question if his arrogant attitude was really any different from his in-laws' greed, bitterly concluding that in Tyria's eyes, he remains just another selfish sinner. The young man remembers his own sharp words spoken at the Wibben mansion and begins to doubt if he really took that initiative to defend his wife from her terrible family. Gripping the handle of his cane firmly, he wonders if he acted that way just to pump up his own distorted sense of superiority. The young man confesses to himself that the feeling that dominated him in that room was not compassion for Tyria, but rather a bizarre and twisted satisfaction in completely crushing and humiliating his in-laws. At that instant, he recalls the imposing voice of his late father, Hovan Portman, relentlessly demanding that he earn the support he received. Overcome by a mix of distress and regret, Elric realizes with dread that he is in no way different from his late father, being just another selfish man who thinks only of himself. Suddenly, the driver is startled by a strange noise coming from inside the carriage cabin and pulls the horse's reins immediately. Elric pushes the vehicle door in a rush and rests his hand on the wooden side with a lot of force. The young man leans out and begins to get violently sick on the ground, choked by a sudden surge of anxiety and self-disgust. Panting and with sweat dripping down his pale face, he tries to catch his breath while muttering that he is a truly wretched and hopeless human being. The young master remains there, leaning on the carriage parked by the roadside, cutting through the immense golden wheat field under the afternoon sky. Suddenly, the soft sound of steps crushing the dry grass breaks the silence of the area, causing him to turn toward the noise. Still breaking into a cold sweat due to the physical discomfort, the young man looks around trying to identify who is approaching. His sharp eyes widen in complete amazement as they focus on a very familiar figure in the middle of the field. He spots Tyria, standing in the middle of the vast wheat fields, wearing her simple country clothes under the soft glow of the evening. The gentle afternoon breeze stirs the girl's blonde hair, and she watches the golden horizon with her usual serenity. The Proto mutters his wife's name with a trembling voice, deeply touched to find her in that isolated place. Forgetting his own physical pain and the cane, he begins to walk hurriedly toward her, mentally questioning everything she went through. He runs with difficulty through the wheat field, invaded by a massive guilt as he reflects on how much the young lady must have suffered in silence at the hands of her own selfish parents. The young man feels choked upon realizing his late father was also one of those responsible for placing that terrible burden on the shoulders of such a young girl. Aldio and little Marie watch the scene from afar with confused expressions, while Elric continues his desperate run through the field, blaming himself for also being one of the causes of that suffering. He reflects that all the people surrounding that poor young lady's life, including himself, in some way hurt her or exploited her over time. The young man finally reaches his wife and grips her wrist firmly, abruptly cutting short the girl's walk. Startled by the sudden approach and her husband's heavy breathing, Tyria turns around and asks confused what is happening to him. Lacking the strength to stand firm and overcome by massive regret, Elric bows before his wife in the middle of the wheat field, holding her hand while starting to apologize for everything. Elric begs for his wife's forgiveness, apologizing for abandoning her completely alone for 10 long years and for trying to justify his selfish actions as if they had been for her own good. Holding Tyria's hands in the middle of the field, he takes the blame for every hardship, pain, and difficulty she was forced to face without any support whatsoever. The young lady listens to him in absolute silence, her eyes widening in complete amazement upon seeing the proud heir admit that all of that had been a huge mistake of his. This highly vulnerable stance brings back memories of the past from when the two were kids, on the day a young Elric brandished a piece of wood to defend little Tyria from a pack of magical beasts. After scaring the monsters away, the little heir turned to the blonde girl and asked if she was okay or if she had been bitten anywhere. The girl shyly answered she was unhurt, but pointed with concern to the boy's leg, which showed a bloody cut. Upon noticing the wound, little Elric jumped in surprise and began to rant angrily at the cursed beasts for daring to bite his leg. Embarrassed, the young girl asked in a low voice for him to step closer so she could examine the injury. While wrapping his wound with delicacy, she listened to him proudly say his name was Elric Portman and that he had only helped her because that occurred on his family's lands, waving off any thanks. Seeing the girl's silence while she cared for him, Elric asked if she was always so quiet and suggested she try to please him, bragging that one day he would become a prestigious royal knight. Little Tyria didn't say a single word and merely continued her work with her cheeks intensely red from shyness. Upon finishing the well-made bandage, she shyly announced she was done, making the young man thank her awkwardly while looking away. Surprised by the girl's skill, he commented. She looked like a lady of high nobility, but asked curiously where she could have learned to treat wounds with so much dexterity. She whispered almost soundlessly that her nanny used to care for her that way, causing the boy to complain about not being able to hear and demanding she speak louder. Feeling pressured by his impatient tone, the young girl merely shrugged her shoulders and turned even redder and more flustered. Elric grumbled that it would be hard for her to survive in the world with such a shy personality, warning teasingly that she would never manage to get married if she kept acting like that. Next, he blushed slightly and muttered that, if he became a royal knight, he might consider the idea of taking her as his bride. Upon hearing that unexpected promise, little Tyria's sharp eyes widened, and she felt her heart race with strong emotion. For the very first time, panicking at her silence, the boy began to shout red with embarrassment, telling her not to brag just because she was pretty, and making up that he only wanted her around for her medical skills. He walked away, stepping firmly and shouting she would beg to marry him when he won the knight title, getting irritated for being ignored by the girl until the very last second. Watching him depart in that proud and noisy way, the young lady merely let out a tender and quiet corner-of-the-mouth smile. Back to the present, in the solitude of her quarters, the image of that determined and confident young Elric remains kept in an elegant frame. Tyria holds her husband's childhood portrait affectionately, recalling with nostalgia the promise made by the boy so many years ago. She smiles sweetly as she notes that although he never became a royal knight, destiny somehow found a way to reunite them again under the same roof. As the evening colors the skies of the Portman estate, housekeeper Rhonda instructs Marie to prepare the tea service for the highly anticipated meeting between the bosses. The head housekeeper leads Tyria back to the mansion quarters with firm and elegant steps through the imposing hallways. During the way, Rhonda comments in a tone of concern that the young master's expression looked quite heavy and melancholy on that day. The young lady walks anxiously with clasped hands, mentally questioning what the true reason behind that call from her husband could be. Upon arriving before the office, the housekeeper knocks softly on the wooden door and solemnly announces that the young master's wife has just arrived. Seated face to face in the luxurious sitting room, the couple remains under a tense silence, with Elric keeping his head low in a thoughtful manner to break the ice of that heavy environment. Tyria takes the initiative and shyly comments she would like to share something important with him. However, the young man gently cuts her off, explaining it was precisely to tell her something very important that he had requested her presence there. Fixing his expressive, sharp eyes on her with total seriousness, the Proto pronounces a sincere and deep apology. Tyria brings her hand to her mouth and lets out a slight gasp of pure surprise. Completely stunned before that unexpected stance from her partner Elric, continues his venting and asks for forgiveness for abandoning her to her own fate precisely on their wedding day, leaving her to carry the entire burden of the property alone. He admits that at the time, he acted in an extremely foolish and impulsive way. Being unable to foresee the severe consequences that his reckless actions would bring to her life, the young man recognizes all the emotional wounds and the great difficulties she had to endure in complete solitude, reinforcing his desire to make amends for the past with a look loaded with hope and sincerity. The heir asks if she would be able to accept his sincere apologies. Tyria stares at him with sweetness and ensures he has no obligation to apologize for those old decisions. She calmly confesses she never kept any grudge against him, and that staying in the Portman mansion was entirely her choice, insisting he shouldn't blame himself for anything. However, noticing the persistent guilt in the young man's gaze, the girl recognizes his heart would never find peace if she simply rejected his request. With a beautiful and warm, blushing smile on her face, she affectionately declares she gladly accepts her husband's apologies. Faced with the young lady's generosity, Elric's tense expression finally melts away, giving way to a genuinely relieved and grateful smile. He thanks her from the bottom of his heart for her understanding and affectionately calls her "Milady." Shortly after, the two begin to walk together through the hallway, with the young man using the support of his dark wooden cane. Showing concern, Tyria asks if his injured leg is feeling a bit better, and he answers he is doing fine, trying to change the subject right after Elric shyly regrets taking up her precious time, knowing her routine is so busy, but she sweetly asks for him not to worry about that. After hesitating for a few moments, the girl calls him in a shy way, catching the husband's attention, who encourages her to speak what she is thinking. Totally flushed with embarrassment, Tyria asks with a lowered head if, instead of calling her "Milady" in such a distant way. With her face burning from shyness and her heart racing, the young lady shyly whispers if he could start calling her "my wife." Elric gets confused by his wife's unheard whisper and asks, a bit awkwardly, what she had just said. Before Tyria can answer, the hallway door is flung open suddenly by the clumsy Marie, who loudly announces that the tea is finally ready. However, with the maid's abrupt entry, the young man totally loses his balance, lets out a shout of surprise, and drops his cane on the floor. Unable to support himself, the young master plunges forward and falls directly on top of Tyria, leaving both in an extremely compromising and close position on the couch. Aldio emerges right behind with a sly smile on his face and comments, in a joking tone, that the couple seem to be quite busy planning the birth of an heir for the Portman family. Completely red with embarrassment and panic, Elric gets up in a hurry while trying to explain to the butler that that was just a terrible accident. Marie falls into despair and begins to shout sincere apologies for the misunderstanding, while Aldio covers the young maid's eyes and mockingly suggests the employees pretend not to have seen their boss's private moments. The elderly butler gives a thumbs up and promises he will notify all the other servants to never disturb the couple when the two are alone, ignoring Elric's desperate protests. With his face burning from embarrassment, the young man desperately tries to smooth over the awkward situation before his wife, Tyria, remains lying on the cushions, with blushing cheeks and breathing heavily, asking in a low voice for him to just get off her for a moment. Before closing the door and leaving the couple alone again, Aldio winks with complicity and wishes the two enjoy their time together well, triggering another shout of anger from Elric. The sitting room door is finally closed with a firm click, leaving only the sound of the young master's complaints echoing from the inside. On that starry night, Elric's shouts of protest against the butler's insinuations continue to echo through the large lit windows of the grand Portman mansion. The next morning, the first rays of sun begin to flood the young man's elegant bedroom while the birds sing happily outside. Housekeeper Rhonda silently enters the young master's quarters and politely asks if he just coughed Elric, already awake and wearing only a light shirt. Wishes a warm good morning to his dedicated childhood housekeeper Rhonda, notices the young man appears to be in an excellent mood and much more energetic than usual, questioning with a complicit smile if something special happened the night before. She approaches slyly and whispers with mischief in his ear, asking if by chance they could already expect news about a future heir for the family. The young master turns red immediately and gestures frantically. Insisting Rhonda must not listen to the outrageous gossip created by the old perverted butler, Rhonda turns her back with a slight amused smile, but soon adopts a serious stance as she warns that the events of the previous night shouldn't be treated as just a minor passing accident. Upon noticing the young man's confused expression, the housekeeper turns around with a stern look and asks if he really doesn't comprehend the gravity of his actions. She presses him with authority and recalls that he spent 10 long years away from home, pointing out that the weight of that time of abandonment is much more painful for a young woman and demanding he never leave Tyria lonely ever again. Meanwhile, in her sunny quarters, the young lady rests peacefully in her luxurious double bed after a refreshing night's sleep. Tyria wakes up with a tender smile on her lips, feeling that sunny morning seems much lighter, happier, and more special than all the previous ones. She holds her husband's small childhood portrait over her chest and affectionately wishes him a good morning. The girl places the frame back on the nightstand, feeling her chest warmed by the certainty that the barrier keeping her away from Elric finally began to crumble after yesterday's sincere conversation. Stretching with joy under the morning light, she considers the lovely idea of starting to greet her husband in person every morning from now on. The sunny day shines brightly over the vast and productive fields of golden wheat surrounding the large estate of the Portman family. In the mansion's banquet hall, the young couple settles down to enjoy the first meal of the day, positioned at the ends of the long wooden table. With calm movements, the meal composed of fried eggs, crispy bacon, and golden toast begins to be served and delicately cut. Tyria enjoys her breakfast in a graceful and peaceful manner, maintaining a flawless and elegant posture. On the other side, Elric tries to eat in silence while a drop of cold sweat drips down his forehead. Feeling extremely tense and embarrassed due to the close accident from the previous night, he can't focus on the meal because his mind insists on recalling the striking image of his wife fallen and blushing underneath him on the office couch. Noticing the young man's evident nervousness, Tyria sweetly calls him, causing him to jump in surprise in his chair and answer in a flustered and fumbling way. With slightly flushed cheeks, the young lady shyly asks if, in case her husband has some free time today, he would like to accompany her on a walk around the property. The young man raises his eyes from his plate and repeats the word walk with a visibly surprised expression. In a silent panic so he doesn't misunderstand the invitation, Tyria quickly explains the inspection is necessary due to the proximity of the harvest festival and that the presence of the lord of the house would be fundamental for the workers. Fulfilling the importance of the event for the family lands, Elric lets out a warm smile and relaxes his posture at the table. He stares at her in a gentle manner and accepts the invitation immediately, ensuring it will be an honor to accompany her during the inspection of the wheat fields. Tyria feels her heart fill with joy at the positive answer and consents with a nod of her head and a beautiful shy smile on her lips. Hours later, in the mansion's dressing quarters, Rhonda asks if the corset of the dress isn't too tight, and the mistress calmly answers the outfit is perfect under the watchful supervision of the housekeeper. The young maids help Tyria adjust her elegant and luxurious dark blue walking dress before the large mirror. Satisfied with the outcome of the lady's look, Rhonda instructs Marie to keep assisting the young lady, while she steps away to check if the master has also finished getting ready. Upon opening the hallway door, the housekeeper runs into the young man already prepared and joyfully celebrates noticing he didn't run late for the appointment. However, Rhonda's expression instantly changes to a look of deep judgment and disbelief as she analyzes the young man's clothing. Elric appears dressed in a bizarre, wide-brimmed pirate hat and leather clothes worthy of a highway mercenary, questioning with an awkward smile if there would be any more practical and efficient outfit for a walk in the field. Furious at the young man's lack of sense, Rhonda firmly grabs him by the arm and drags him back through the hallway, ranting that he is going to inspect a family farm and not march to a war in bandit attire. She pushes the doors of Elric's personal closet hard, determined to put a final end to that visual embarrassment. The young master tries to protest while being dragged into the room, vainly insisting he is already a grown man and perfectly capable of choosing his own clothes alone. Giving no mind to the heir's complaints, Rhonda throws him back onto a chair with authority and sharply orders him to remain seated while she provides a proper outfit of a true lord. Rhonda pulls her white gloves in an intimidating way and declares that a noble must always dress with the dignity his position requires, warning she is going to completely change his look at that exact moment. Ignoring the young man's desperate appeals, the housekeeper begins to rip off the leather pieces and the pirate hat with quick and accurate movements, getting rid of those plain colors. With his shirt half open, Elric laughs nervously and begs for Rhonda to stop, insisting he can dress himself as long as she just picks the clothes and leaves the room at once. The woman lets out an amused laugh and taunts him, asking if the young master would be embarrassed around her right now, reminding him that he used to run around naked through the mansion when he was just a kid. Tired of idle chatter, the dedicated housekeeper steps resolutely toward the heir and demands he get a move on with it. With a firm yank, she rips his shirt off all at once, causing the young man to stumble back, letting out a shout of surprise. However, the silliness of the moment vanishes instantly when Rhonda brings her hand to her mouth, completely shocked and speechless at what she just saw. Before her eyes, the young man's chest and abdomen reveal themselves packed with deep and terrifying battle scars accumulated over a decade of war. Trembling, and with eyes welled with tears, the housekeeper asks with a choked voice what could have happened to his body during all those years of absence. With a serious and slightly embarrassed face, Elric begins to button his shirt slowly, commenting that it was exactly why he made a point to dress alone. Rhonda approaches with a broken heart, weeping as she begs for him to tell her what's so terrible he had to face on the battlefield. The young man affectionately rests his hand on the housekeeper's tearful face and tenderly promises he will tell her the whole truth as soon as the proper moment arrives. With a gentle and somewhat vulnerable smile, the young master earnestly asks for her to keep those marks a secret and reveal nothing to Tyria. Sensing the weight of the young man's silent suffering, Rhonda bites her lips and squeezes his hand hard to contain her own crying. Regaining her firm posture of a housekeeper, she wipes her tears and ensures that from that day on, she will be the sole person responsible for helping him dress, receiving a sincere thank you from the young master shortly after. Elric walks with elegant steps toward the carriage where the elderly driver Aldio patiently awaits him. The young man emerges flawlessly dressed in a luxurious dark blue dress suit and a perfectly aligned satin handkerchief around his neck. Analyzing him through his monocle, Aldio confesses with relief that he feared the young man would appear dressed as a bandit and make the mistress faint from embarrassment. Concluding his worries were in vain, the young master laughs and confesses with good humor that it almost happened, but fortunately, Rhonda stepped in on time to save him from a visual disaster. While the two talk, Aldio gestures in respect, noticing Tyria's approach, who comes walking gracefully toward the carriage accompanied by her maids. The young lady emerges stunning in her blue dress, shyly confessing she put more effort than usual into her look, because it was their first official walk together. Elric stares at her, completely hypnotized by such beauty, and with intensely blushing cheeks, manages only to stammer that she looks absolutely wonderful. Tyria thanks him with a sweet, blushing smile of shyness, while Rhonda watches the scene from afar and decides to guard the secret of the scars upon seeing the mistress genuinely happy with her husband. The heir extends his hand with gentlemanliness and helps his wife step up into the vehicle under the beautiful blue sky crowning the start of that journey. A short time later, the carriage arrives at the bustling market of the Portman estate, where the voices of the residents begin to echo in a tone of surprise. The news about the young master's return spreads like wildfire among the local market crowd, generating a wave of whispers and gossip about the Portman heir's unexpected comeback. Elric walks arm in arm with his wife, waving back in a friendly way and wishing everyone well and prosperous on the farm. In the grocery sector, friendly Aunt Michelle recognizes the young man immediately and celebrates enthusiastically, hugging the former mischievous boy who has now become such a strong and imposing man. Near the village taverns, the old local residents also approach happy and surprised, having a hard time believing the young man truly returned home. One of them notices the young man's cane and questions what could have occurred with his leg, causing Elric to scratch his head awkwardly and answer it was just a light battle injury, while the peasants lament that the future lord needs such robustness. Suddenly, an enthusiastic shout calling for Chief Elric makes the Proto look back with curiosity. It is Bart, the young man's great childhood friend, who runs toward the group with a massive and warm grin from ear to ear. The two friends greet each of them with an extremely strong handshake packed with nostalgia. In the middle of laughs and jokes, Elric celebrates that his companion changed absolutely nothing. While Bart jokes that the chief is so different and elegant, he almost didn't recognize him. The blonde young man greets Tyria with respect, and the young lady returns the warmth, sincerely wishing her husband's childhood friend is in excellent health. Always very lively, Bart points to his business and invites the couple to stop by his tavern later so they can drink and celebrate the reunion properly. Thumping his chest with enthusiasm, the Portman heir promises he will definitely make a visit to his friend to catch up. The couple says goodbye to Bart with friendly waves while continuing their pleasant walk through the bustling market under the afternoon light. Watching the two walk away arm in arm, the young bartender smiles satisfied upon realizing that, against all his past expectations, they form an incredibly harmonious couple. At the end of that productive day, the carriage starts the ride back to the mansion while the sun sets on the horizon of the vast wheat fields. On the inside of the vehicle, Tyria remains focused on reading a book while Elric watches her in an attentive and silent manner. The young man peeks at the pages of the work and notices, surprised, that his wife is focused on studying a detailed encyclopedia on botany with a smooth and affectionate tone of voice. The Proto breaks the silence of the space and calls for his wife in a gentle manner. Tyria raises her eyes from her reading with slightly blushing cheeks, promptly answering her husband's call. With a welcoming smile on his lips, Elric reveals his desire to start actively helping her in the management of the lands, gently asking for her to teach him everything about the farm service. Awkwardly, he scratches the back of his neck and admits she carried that heavy burden entirely alone for way too long, expressing his firm desire to act with the responsibility of a true family leader, even if late. The young man ensures that if she guides him and teaches the work with patience, he will become very useful for the business, leaving the girl so flustered she hides her blushing face behind the book. Peeking over the pages with a sweet, emotional smile, Tyria sheds tears of happiness upon realizing her husband finally became the mature and reliable man she always dreamed of. With renewed determination, the young lady closes the botany book with a firm snap on her lap. She stares at her husband with her brilliant, sharp eyes and, with a look full of firmness and sweetness, asks if he would be prepared for her to be extremely strict in her teachings. Exactly the way the late patriarch taught her, Elric laughs lightly in a gentle manner and accepts that she be rigid with him during the teachings. While the carriage continues its journey under the beautiful evening, the young man asks if his late father really taught her with so much rigidity, and Tyria answers with a proud smile that yes, though she never got scolded for being an exemplary student who learned everything very fast. The scene then changes to a bustling tavern situated near the Chevor border, under the intense glow of the full moon. On the inside of the establishment, dozens of customers take advantage of the night to drink, talk, and have fun in a quite noisy environment. Suddenly, a person in black boots and red socks enters the place, stomping her foot hard on the wooden floor, and loudly orders all the fools there to shut up and pay attention to her. The bartender immediately interrupts the cleaning of his glasses and looks toward the entry with an expression of extreme surprise and confusion, revealing herself under the torchlight. A young woman with red hair and a dark cloak stops at the door and coldly warns she will ask that question only a single time. With a dark and intimidating look, she sharply demands they tell her where Kasha is, the feared sword demon. The next day, on the imposing estate of the Portman family, the morning sun rays illuminate the luxurious mansion under a golden sky. In the office, the smooth sound of a quill sliding over paper echoes through the space, while a hand signs several documents with speed. Seeing his wife immersed in so much work, Elric asks if she usually takes care of all that paperwork alone, and Tyria answers calmly that that only occurs during the busiest harvest periods. Tyria then raises her eyes from her writing in a shy way and calls him Lord, causing the young man to gently ask for her to say what she wishes. With blushing cheeks, the young lady questions if he would consider giving a public speech during the harvest festival to officially celebrate his return to the fief. The suggestion leaves the Portman heir quite tense and breaking into a cold sweat, making him smile out of the corner of his mouth while anxiously pondering the idea of making an announcement before so many people. At that moment, he remembers his war times, when the soldiers of Parvan shouted rallying cries and furiously demanded the death of all their enemies on the battlefield. The Proto recalls that in the time he acted as the relentless mercenary Kasha, he simply hated and ignored any kind of motivational speech while resting in silence. He never stepped onto stages to utter beautiful words, and never had the slightest intention to act as an inspiring leader for others. Elric knows very well that the true reason he stepped onto those desolate war settings had no connection to noble ideals. At the end of the day, he marched to combat only because he desperately needed a target to vent all his aimless rage. Taken by this blind hatred, the young man mercilessly cut down all enemy soldiers who crossed his path under the bloodied sky. As if he were a rabid and out-of-control dog, his sole goal was to crush anyone who dared to stand in his front. Remembering his former monstrous face covered in blood, Elric questions if someone so corrupted would have the right to speech to the people, until being brought back to reality by Tyria's sweet voice. Waking up from his dark memories, the young man waves in a flustered way and quickly apologizes to his wife for zoning out suddenly. He then suggests with a comforting smile that Tyria herself make the official festival speech while he stays firm by her side to support her in public. The young lady accepts the proposal gladly and agrees she herself will take the responsibility to speech to the residents in this harvest. She smiles with tenderness, thinking that having her dear husband by her side during the event is already more than enough to make her happy. Later, before a large crowd gathered in the village square, Tyria begins the harvest festival immensely, thanking all the residents for the excellent work carried out throughout the year. With a radiant smile, the young lady wraps up her words officially, declaring the event open and inviting everyone to enjoy the party to the max. The peasants celebrate the opening with enthusiastic shouts of joy and clap to celebrate the start of the festivities. Hand in hand with Elric, Tyria stares at him with affection and asks if they shouldn't also go have fun and explore the festival stalls. As soon as the couple begins to walk through the bustling square, the local residents watch them with deep admiration and comment, happy about the illustrious presence of their leaders. A friendly female resident approaches and respectfully offers a dish of local food for the young lady to try. Right after, another peasant extends a massive mug of foaming beer and invites the young lord to drink and celebrate with them. With their arms full of gifts, the couple smiles happily and thanks from the heart for the hospitality, wishing a wonderful festival to all those present. While they walk, Tyria's eyes suddenly widen in surprise, noticing something very unusual happening in the center of the square. She firmly grabs her husband's arm with blushing cheeks and enthusiastically points for him to watch the attraction further ahead. On the main stage, a costumed artist performs for the Wibben public and announces the start of a rare show brought directly from the royal court. The presenter proclaims loudly that the next and dangerous attraction consists of the incredible act of swallowing swords. The jester stuffs the entire sharp blade into his own mouth, leaving the young lady completely shocked at such boldness, while the husband watches the scene with an awkward smile. At the end of the impressive performance, Tyria claps in an enthusiastic way along with the other spectators in the square. However, looking to the side, she notices Elric remains with a completely neutral and uninterested expression before the show. Upon being questioned if he didn't find the presentation impressive, the young man scratches his head and changes the subject, saying he merely has already seen many people swallowing swords in the past, hiding the fact that in the war, he was the person responsible for making enemies swallow real blades. Continuing the pleasant walk arm in arm, the couple passes in front of a large panel announcing a knife-throwing game. The stall owner recognizes the prota and loudly invites him to take a few throws, causing the children around to get extremely excited to see the lord play. The merchant points to 3 apples hanging on the wooden panel and ensures he will give a fine prize in case he manages to hit the targets. Elric smiles awkwardly and comments, "It has been a long time since he held a knife," but the boys fervently insist for him to demonstrate his combat skills. With a sweet smile on her face, Tyria holds his hand and encourages him to participate in the game, along with the little ones yielding to his wife's affectionate appeals. The portman heir takes the weapons and walks toward the throwing line under the children's joyful shouts. The game owner asks in a good-humored way for the lord to not get too nervous, without imagining that the young man's sharp eyes have just sharpened with the coldness of a true warrior, with quick movements and a flawless stance. Elric throws the blades with surgical precision and hits the exact center of all the apples dead on without the slightest difficulty. The merchant and the children are completely jaw-dropped and let out a shout of surprise before such a feat. Tyria watches the scene with blushing cheeks, unable to believe her husband's surgical precision. Noticeable general surprise, Elric begins to break into a cold sweat and wonders if he should have pretended to be a bit worse at throwing to not raise suspicions. He decides to disguise his extraordinary skill, attributing everything to pure luck. Humbly commenting with his wife, he hopes to have done enough to not be an embarrassment. Extremely excited, Tyria joins her hands and enthusiastically praises her husband, saying seeing him throw the knives was like watching the performance of a true knight. Noticing his wife is much more lively and radiant than usual, thanks to the festive mood, the young man smiles out of the corner of his mouth and feels genuinely happy for her. The game owner then approaches with a large straw package and extends the earned prize to the young master. He explains with a massive smile that the freebie prepared by the Merchants Guild is a valuable basket full of fresh eggs. With extreme generosity, Elric gently declines the prize and asks for the man to deliver the egg basket to the local children, who enthusiastically celebrate the young leader's attitude. Tyria stares at him with a deeply tender look and admiringly comments he is an extremely kind man. Feeling a bit awkward, Elric reveals he was merely recalling the past, telling that he also used to win those egg packages when he was a kid and would be immensely happy upon finding a golden egg hidden among them. With a beautiful laugh, Tyria recalls that the young man used to use that valuable golden egg to buy the metallic helmet of an old village knight, though the piece was so immense it looked like a bucket upside down on his childhood body. The young master is totally shocked and widens his eyes, surprisingly questioning how his wife could know such an intimate detail of his childhood. In a silent panic, Taraya stammers and tries to quickly cover it up, clumsily claiming he was the biggest troublemaker in the region and that the rumors about his antics ran everywhere. However, she bites her lips and thinks to herself that she cannot under any circumstance reveal the true reason behind that knowledge. The truth is that the little girl used to watch him in secret from behind the trees every single day, nurturing, since that time, the deep desire to become the bride of that mischievous boy. Bringing her back to the present, the young man calls her in a smooth way to capture her attention. With a welcoming smile on his lips and his hand extended in a gentlemanly way, Elric notes the after-ceremony party is about to start and asks if they should proceed toward the central square. Feeling her chest warmed by so much affection, Tyria firmly holds her husband's hand and accepts the invitation with a beautiful smile. Under the beautiful starry night sky, the festival presenter raises a lit torch before the crowd and announces the start of the traditional lighting ceremony to kick off the party. Before lighting the large bonfire, he makes sure to warmly thank the illustrious presence of the Portman couple, enthusiastically praising the young lady's stunning beauty. The crowd enjoys it and laughs at the speaker's statement, while Elric comments in good humor that the man is truly a quite charismatic figure. The presenter gestures in a dramatic way to the public and invites everyone to make a prayer for the prosperity and eternal glory of their lands. However, in a totally unexpected way, he loudly declares that the ceremony must start with a passionate kiss between Lord Elric and Lady Tyria. Upon hearing the bold proposal, the two young people jump in surprise and stare at each other, completely embarrassed and speechless. Tyria feels her cheeks burn with shame upon realizing she will have to kiss her husband, before the entire gathered village. Meanwhile, the presenter keeps speeching on the central stage with his torch raised before all those present. The festival host insists once more loudly on the importance of carrying out that beautiful tradition to bless the local lands. He gestures excited and formally summons the two leaders to give continuity to the expected kiss rite. With intensely flushed cheeks and racing hearts, the two young people exchange looks packed with hesitation and shyness. From the middle of the crowd, Bart lets out a teasing laugh and shouts for his childhood friend to get a move on with it, causing Elric to mentally curse the meddling bartender. Always very playful, the young tavern keeper encourages the entire public to start a chant to give the young master the necessary courage. In a matter of seconds, dozens of local residents begin to clap and shout in unison for the couple to finally kiss. Seeing there is no way to escape that pressure, Elric slightly leans toward his wife and gently asks for a moment's permission. With a quick movement full of attitude, the young man pulls her by the waist and smoothly leans her back in an extremely cinematic and romantic hug. He firmly approaches her lips, leaving the young lady with wide eyes and with her heart beating in her throat before such physical proximity. With blushing cheeks, the young man pulls away slightly and asks for whispered apologies, explaining he did that only to satisfy the expectations of the festival people and make them stop. With the insistence, Tyria closes her eyes with a gentle smile and answers she perfectly understands her husband's decision to follow with the festive tradition. However, she suddenly pulls him by the neck in a resolute way and declares she does not intend to just fake or fulfill expectations, sealing his lips in a deep and passionate kiss. Faced with such a demonstration of affection, the crowd goes wild with deafening shouts of celebration, while the large bonfire is finally lit in the background. Under the spectacular glow of the full moon, the peasants celebrate, happy, wishing that the couple's love be eternal and that it bring endless glories to their lands. Hours later, the imposing Portman mansion rests silent under the mantle of the starry night, while silence takes over the hallways inside her luxurious room. Tyria appears kneeling on the bed and buries her face in a pillow to muffle her shouts of pure embarrassment. She draws air in a panting way with intensely red cheeks, almost unable to breathe due to the internal fluster. Her brain insists on replaying the passionate kiss scene in slow motion, making her desperately question what the heck she had in her head to take such a bold and sudden stance with her husband. Distressed with the fear that her husband now considers her a strange or way too forward woman, the young lady rolls from side to side in bed without managing to catch a wink of sleep during the entire night. On the other side of the hallway, Elric himself also finds himself totally awake and lying on his back, touching his own lips in a trance, while his heart beats in an out-of-control way. Meanwhile, in a place distant from there, the imposing residence of an influential noble family rises majestic under the sunny sky of the Armen Kingdom. On the inside of the luxurious palace, a hand elegantly holds a sophisticated porcelain cup adorned with golden details. A mysterious man with round glasses and blonde hair takes a calm sip of his hot drink, starting his daily activities with absolute tranquility. Secretary Agnes Blackmire approaches the luxurious work desk and informs Edward White that the Imperial Army forces managed to break through the defense lines of the Falbin and Chabor borders. Upon hearing the news, the blonde man places his cup back on the saucer and comments with disdain that since Kasha's departure from the battlefields, the defenses of those regions proceeded to crumble in an inevitable way. Officially identified as the Gold Duke Edward White, he smiles satisfied and points out that having the mercenary Kasha as the main target of his plans was an absolutely brilliant move on his part. By his side, with a cold and expressionless stance, his efficient secretary Agnes Blackmire listens to her boss's words without showing any reaction. However, the girl adopts a firmer stance and questions if it is really wise to allow those two regions to fall into the hands of the Imperial Army, given they possess a considerable financial stake within the powerful EW group. Edward gives one more sip of his tea and calmly explains that the war of conquest started by the Emperor has already lasted 7 long years, detailing that those two locations only managed to maintain military funding until now due to the shares they held in his corporation. He downs the rest of the drink in his mouth, while supplementing that those lands have already completely lost any capacity to pay off the monumental debts they accumulated with the Armen Kingdom. With a sharp look, the Duke ensures that the final fall of the two regions is just a matter of time now that the feared mercenary is no longer there to defend them, pointing out they need only to rescue the important allies and regain control of their shares before the final collapse. Fulfilling her boss's true intentions, the secretary extends her hand to hold the gold teapot on the table and serve more drink. While serving Edward's cup with graceful movements, Agnes comments in a neutral tone that he is an extremely relentless man in his business. The blonde man changes his stance immediately and complains in a cartoonish and tearful way, insisting in his defense that he is only fulfilling his civic duty as an honorable noble of the Armen Kingdom. Resuming the focus of the conversation in a serious manner, the girl questions if it would be really safe to leave the legendary Kasha free and without any type of constant surveillance. The Gold Duke lets out a slight smile out of the corner of his mouth and corrects his secretary, ensuring that the feared sword demon no longer exists and that now he is just an ordinary man named Elric Portman. Agnes makes mention that they should have eliminated the warrior definitely from the start to avoid future risks, to which Edward counters, breaking into a cold sweat, that trying to kill him in a direct way would have been a fatal mistake had they failed the mission. The blonde man recalls that the secretary witnessed Kasha's absurd power in the past, when the mercenary managed to deflect a projectile at the speed of sound, using a magic barrier in a fraction of a second, even after having his knees severely shattered in combat. He rests his elbows on the table and explains it would be a tremendous waste to simply take the life of someone with such potential, asserting with conviction that the current outcome ended up being much more beneficial for his plans. Edward comments that the warrior he knew was a mercenary at heart and that both belonged to the same type of ambitious people, though a crucial and very striking difference exists between their personalities. The Duke gestures in a calm way and reveals that, unlike ordinary warriors who fight strictly for gold, Elric never acted based on his own interests or personal gains. With a dark and intimidating look, the blonde man confesses that, knowing exactly the young man's character, he took the decision to keep him under his absolute control and manipulate his actions as if he were a puppet. He points out that without the presence of the sword demon on the front line, the military conflicts will soon enter an inevitable stalemate, forcing several desperate nations to seek the financial support of the EW Corporation. Agnes listens to the explanation attentively and concludes that during this economic and military stalemate, the retired warrior will become the perfect weight to unbalance the scales in Edward's favor, allowing the company to accumulate even more monumental wealth. Upon hearing his assistant's flawless reasoning, the Gold Duke gets extremely thrilled and with eyes shining with happiness for her sharp wit. He jumps from his chair with a massive smile on his face and enthusiastically points at the young woman, noisily celebrating her being such a smart and sharp assistant. Always very effusive, the young man walks toward Agnes with open arms, insisting she come to him to receive a strong hug of thanks. However, his attempt at approaching is cut short in a brutal way by a well-aimed strike that makes him spit from so much pain. With her fist still clenched and a frosty face, the secretary passes over her boss, fallen on the floor, and seriously warns him to not try any funny business with her, ensuring she won't go easy just because he is young. Back to the Wibbin lands, the day breaks sunny, and with few clouds over the luxurious mansion of the Portman family. In his personal quarters, Elric watches his own reflection in the mirror while housekeeper Rhonda assists him to adjust his elegant walking overcoat. The young master walks toward the main hallway, closely accompanied by his trusted housekeeper, a moment when he spots his beautiful wife approaching from afar. Upon running into her husband right in the morning, the young lady instantly gets blushing cheeks and calls him in a shy way. Elric also cannot contain his own nervousness and turns around with a slightly flushed face as he greets her in a hesitant tone. Noticing the adorable tension and the clear embarrassment hanging between the couple after the night of the kiss, Rhonda lets out a teasing laugh and approaches to spice up the conversation in a casual way. In total panic of embarrassment, the young lady turns around abruptly and goes running through the hallway as fast as her legs can handle. The young man scratches his neck awkwardly while watching his wife's desperate escape, under the watchful and analytical eye of the housekeeper who is right behind him. Curious about the bizarre behavior of both, Rhonda questions if the two had fought, commenting she had been very happy to hear rumors that the mood between them was quite warm during the celebration of the previous night. The young man gestures frantically and tries to explain that everything was nothing more than a tease from his friend Bart, to which the housekeeper corners him with mischief, asking if at least the warm part of the rumor was true. Completely embarrassed and with a burning face, the Proto decides to change the subject immediately and questions who would be the important guests arriving at the fief today. Resuming her professional stance, the housekeeper clarifies that an important commercial delegation coming directly from the Western Kingdoms is about to land at the location. Upon listening to the mention of the Western Kingdoms, Elric's look turns serious and a drop of cold sweat drips down his forehead due to the memories of his military past. She explains enthusiastically that the high-quality wheat produced on their lands attracts delegations from various countries annually, joyfully revealing that even the powerful Armen Kingdom decided to participate in the bidding dispute. This time Elric bites his hand in a sign of pure apprehension, fearing that some of the foreign representatives might recognize his true identity as the feared mercenary and bring serious trouble to the peaceful barony. The housekeeper ponders that the responsibility of receiving them would normally be Tyrion's, but argues it would be much more proper for the lord of the house to take that leadership role now, receiving the young man's reluctant agreement. A short time later, the young master appears at the imposing Wiben train station, accompanied by the loyal driver Aldio, who patiently asks for him to not get so tense with the meeting. The driver ensures in a good-humored way that it will be enough to utter a few formal greetings of nobility, as he himself taught him for everything to go perfectly well, receiving a sincere thank you from the young man. The Proto takes a deep breath and tries to calm his own thoughts, rationalizing that none of the surviving warriors who witnessed his fury on the battlefields would come to a peaceful countryside region just to trade wheat. He slides his hand discreetly under his coat to ensure his hidden weapon is in place. Though he knows very well there shouldn't exist any plausible reason to use it today, suddenly, the gigantic steam locomotive emerges on the platform tracks, emitting a noisy whistle and announcing the arrival of the foreign delegation at the train station. With the sound of brakes and the opening of the passenger car doors, the first members of the delegation begin to step down onto the stone platform. With a flawless posture of a lord, Elric takes a step forward, hand in hand with his cane, and gives official welcome to the visitors on behalf of the Portman family. However, the instant he raises his eyes to stare at the newcomers while offering the property carriages for transport, the young man jumps in surprise, running into a totally unexpected presence before him. The man in a green suit and greenish mustache takes a step back, breaking into a cold sweat of absolute dread. Under Elric's piercing look, the memories of a bloody past seem to surface in a terrifying way. Trembling and completely pale, the man extends his hand, stammering from dread, and asks if he is the terrible mercenary Kasha. The scene then returns briefly to the luxurious residence of Edward White in the Armen Kingdom. The Gold Duke runs desperate through the palace hallways, closely accompanied by Agnes, complaining that his sister didn't warn him at all about that unexpected visit. He flings the imposing doors of the main sitting room open with haste to receive the illustrious guest with a massive smile and open arms. Edward joyfully greets his dear older sister. However, the girl stares back at him in an impassive way with an extremely sharp and impatient look. Revealing herself as the largest shareholder of the corporation and known as the Flaming Flower, Egret Valentina awaits him with crossed arms on the couch. Ignoring her frown, the blonde man lifts her in the air in an affectionate way and jokes that she seems to have grown quite a bit since their last meeting. With flames of pure fury in her red eyes, Valentina coldly demands he put her on the floor before she incinerates him right there. The Gold Duke gets totally trembling from dread and immediately agrees to put her back in the seat. Without wasting time on formalities, the young woman with red hair demands answers and demands to know if he finally discovered the whereabouts of the mercenary, Kasha. Edward scratches his head awkwardly and stammers, saying the warrior simply vanished like a ghost, making the task of locating him extremely difficult. Valentina yells furious and threatens him, saying she will withdraw all her shares from the corporation in case he doesn't find the sword demon, causing immediate panic in the young man, who desperately begs for her to not do that. She firmly pinches her brother's cheek with disdain and sharply orders that if he doesn't want to go broke, he better locate and bring Kasha's rascal to her presence as soon as possible. She then turns her back in a dramatic way, making her dark cloak swing in the air. Valentina displays an expression full of determination and firmness as she prepares to depart. She leaves the room coldly, warning she won't give him much time and demands he at least discover the warrior's trail, leaving Edward totally discouraged. The imposing doors of the sitting room close with a violent crash right behind her. Still on his knees on the floor under Agnes's look, Edward answers scared that he will never reveal Kasha's true location to his sister, knowing very well that the meeting of those two monsters would cause a catastrophe of continental proportions. Quickly changing focus, the young man stands up and questions if Armin's commercial comedy has already been duly sent to the Weiben Fief. Agnes confirms yes, but expresses her doubts, claiming an astute warrior like Kasha would hardly bite such an obvious bait of commercial relations. With a wicked expression full of malice, the Duke counters that though the mercenary Kasha would refuse, the young master Elric Portman will be forced to accept the commercial agreement because he prepared an unrefusable proposal to save the barony. The scene then focuses on the passenger train crossing the vast and golden wheat fields of the Portman property. On the inside of one of the luxurious cars, the scared Lord Polo travels in silence beside a noble with purple hair, positioned right in front of the two commercial representatives. The elderly diplomat with graying hair glares at them with seriousness. He displays a cold and stern face while closely analyzing his subordinates. The focus then returns to the bustling platform of the Wibben station, under the noise of the locomotive's steam. The important diplomat in a dark suit finally takes his first step out of the passenger car. Elric and Aldio make an elegant bow of welcome to warmly receive the illustrious comedy that has just stepped down. The young master smiles in a friendly way and explains he provided comfortable carriages to take them directly to the premises of the family mansion. However, upon hearing Elric's voice, Lord Polo widens his eyes and stands completely paralyzed from dread. Under the dark glow of the young man's red eyes, terrible memories of the past come to the noble's mind in an overwhelming way. The merchant extends his trembling hand and begins to stammer from dread, almost unable to utter the words. In absolute panic, Lord Polo begins to bawl and step back scared before the confusion of his travel companions, while Elric freezes from nervousness upon realizing he had the bad luck of running into precisely that man from his past there. The Prota swallows hard and knows that if his true identity as the Sword Demon is revealed, the entire Wibben barony will run a mortal danger, deciding he needs to hide who he is at any cost. While Lord Polo desperately begs to turn around with the train back to his country, his companions try to calm him, a moment when Elric steps in calmly to make his presentation. With an incredibly silly smile and playing dumb, the young man scratches his head and officially introduces himself as Elric Portman, the current lord of those lands. The foreign noble stands totally stunned and confused upon hearing that family name, internally questioning if that so clumsy young man really wouldn't be the feared mercenary. Kasha Elric laughs in a friendly way and asks if he is feeling well due to his clear paleness, causing Polo to breathe relieved upon concluding that a smiling fool like that could never be the Sword Demon. He closes his eyes for an instant and recalls that the terrible killer he witnessed in the past of war was a completely different monster. In his memories from 5 years ago, an arrogant noble appears delivering a violent slap to the face of a humble employee during a luxurious imperial banquet. The incident causes an immense ruckus and generates whispers of discontent and disapproval among all the aristocrats present in the large hall. The ladies and gentlemen of high society watch the scandal with expressions of deep shock and indignation before such uncalled-for aggression, fallen on the marble floor after suffering a quick retaliation. The arrogant Lord Polo rants furious that a maggot of unknown lineage should have never dared to commit such insolence against him. Faced with the aristocrat's fury, young Elric Portman emerges flawlessly dressed in a gray suit and begins to slowly remove his white gala gloves with a cold and relentless face. Showing no hesitation, the Portman heir delivers a humiliating slap to the noble's face using his own glove and declares there is no need for further discussions. With a look of absolute disdain, the young man decrees that severe offense to his family's honor must be resolved in a definitive way through a duel. Lord Polo accepts the challenge, immediately taken by a blind fury, loudly ordering the guards to bring 2 swords so he can teach an unforgettable etiquette lesson to the bold young man. During the heated discussion of the past, a strong voice demands they stop immediately, revealing itself to be Lord Elvis Graham in his wheelchair. Elric interrupts his aggressive movement and looks back with a cold and totally indifferent expression. Elvis tries to appease the situation and offers sincere apologies to Lord Polo on behalf of his companion. But the man with the mustache rants furious that it is already too late for apologies. While the arrogant Polo rants that he won't accept that severe offense to his honor, Elvis takes a stern stance and sharply orders the feared mercenary Kasha to lower his head and offer immediate apologies to the noble. Upon hearing the name of the feared sword demon, Polo stands instantly paralyzed from dread, remembering that Kasha is a legendary and extremely dangerous figure with whom nobody should ever dare to cross paths or make enmity on the battlefield. He focuses his eyes on the young man and swallows hard upon noting that the terrible demon he witnessed in the past of war was exactly that relentless creature returning to the present at the train station. Polo calms down and tries to disguise his desperate reaction, claiming he ended up getting worked up without need and asking to disregard the misunderstanding, leaving Elric quite relieved as he proposes to proceed with the walk. However, while walking right behind the young man who smiles in a friendly way, the foreign noble rumbles from anger, thinking that the simple memory of that cursed mercenary is still capable of haunting him that way. He casts an extremely suspicious look out of the corner of his eye toward the Portman heir, the family's luxurious carriage follows its journey under the stunning reddish sky of the evening. The elderly driver Aldio warns the passengers they will arrive at the premises of the imposing mansion in a few moments and asks for everyone to get ready to step down. Upon arriving at the main courtyard, the beautiful Tyria awaits them gracefully beside her maids and gives them official welcome to the Wyban lands. With a welcoming and very elegant smile, she formally introduces herself as Tyria Portman and declares it is an immense honor to receive the prestigious foreign comedy. Noticing the group's visible exhaustion after the long trip, the young lady gently suggests they settle in their quarters first to rest and regain energy. She then turns to the housekeeper and requests that Rhonda personally accompany the guests to their respective rooms, receiving an immediate affirmative reply. A few hours pass and the darkness of the night falls over the imposing Portman mansion, while soft knocks echo on the door of one of the rooms. Settled comfortably in a red armchair in his quarters, Lord Polo finds the disturbance at that hour of the night odd and questions if it would be room service with calm and resolute steps. A man silently invades the noble's quarters. Polo interrupts his sentence immediately and widens his eyes, running into the Portman heir's silhouette before him. Elric stares at him in an extremely serious manner under the room's twilight and coldly declares that, though it isn't room service, he will need to bother Lord Polo tonight. Dominated by a sudden dread, the noble slips from his armchair and falls clumsy to his knees on the marble floor. Pointing his trembling finger toward the young man, he desperately stammers and asserts that that dark look confirms he is really the terrible sword demon. The man's desperate shouts echo through the lit windows of the property, repeating with absolute certainty that the young master hides the true face of the terrible Kasha. Seeing there are no more reasons to maintain the charade before his old war acquaintance, Elric calmly approaches and confesses he no longer intends to hide his true identity. Backing away, dragging along the floor out of pure despair, Polo stammers and questions why he is doing that, begging to spare him and reminding that he had already asked for apologies for what occurred in the past. Elric settles with elegance in the red armchair that belonged to the guest and coldly points out if he is referring to the fateful day he publicly humiliated his family. The young man stares at him with a frosty look and cuts him off, warning he doesn't recall accepting those apologies at any moment of his life. Noticing the man's despair, Elric asks if he plans to keep thrown on the floor and ironically invites him to sit so they can discuss some pending business. Fixing his sharp red look on the speaker, the young master questions if his comedy didn't travel there precisely with the intention of buying the wheat produced on his lands. After the initial scare, the two men finally settle in the armchairs, positioned face to face in the luxurious sitting room. Lord Polo tries to regain composure, though he keeps breaking into a cold sweat under the intimidating presence of the former sword demon. Elric starts the negotiations, casually revealing that before receiving them at the station, he had a private meeting with the influential Lord Ugal Polo, widens his eyes and anxiously questions about the substance of that conversation, to which the young man calmly answers the other noble made him a very interesting financial proposal. The Prota inquires if Ugal's plan would be to acquire the totality of Wyban's agricultural production all at once. The scene then shows Lord Ugal holding a gleaming gold coin while confirming that all the bought wheat would be subsequently distributed through the vast western regions under the control of the Armen Kingdom. The elderly noble slides the valuable coin over the wooden table, detailing that a percentage of commission would be passed directly to the coffers of the Portman family. However, he raises his index finger and imposes a single and severe condition to close the business, demanding absolute exclusivity in the purchase of all the wheat for his own kingdom. The diplomat stares at the young man with seriousness and expresses his confidence that the current leader of the Portman house will take the smartest decision for the future of his lands. He wraps up his words, displaying a subtle and ambitious smile out of the corner of his mouth as he pronounces the Prota's surname. Upon taking knowledge of that exclusivity trap, Lord Polo loses his patience and strikes the table hard, cursing the uncalled-for greed of the Armen Kingdom. Extremely irritated, the noble rants that now he understands the reason for the other delegation's silence, cursing against the betrayal of that old rascal who planned to double-cross his business. Taking advantage of his rival's fury, Elric leans forward and calmly proposes they close an alternative agreement directly with each other, leaving Polo surprised. With a subtle smile out of the corner of his mouth on his lips, the young master confirms the offer, imposing only the condition that the final sale price of the crop match the generous value offered by the rivals. Polo adopts a more restrained stance and argues that despite exercising the function of supply official of the empire, he lacks authority to accept such a high value in a unilateral way. Elric ironically proposes that the definitive acceptance of those old apologies from the past serve as the guarantee of the agreement, ensuring that way no bitter resentment will remain between the two in the future. The two men stare at each other in silence for an instant, measuring forces through the look in the room's twilight. The supply official tries to bargain and proposes to close the business for only 60% of the initial value, to which the young man calmly counters that such a drastic discount would bring serious complications to the family business. Lord Polo bites his lips out of pure tension upon realizing he is totally cornered at the negotiation table. Desperate to not lose the valuable wheat to the rivals, he increases the proposal to 70% and ensures the empire will fully assume all customs and transport costs of the goods. With a calm and unwavering look of an experienced negotiator, Elric makes his final counterproposal demanding 75% of the total value under the same conditions established previously. With a firm handshake, the business agreement is finally sealed between the two men. Elric celebrates the excellent business with Lord Polo, who admits to being impressed by him being the first to secure such an advantageous negotiation against the Empire. Intrigued, the merchant with the mustache asks why he chose to negotiate specifically with him out of so many people. At that moment, the Prota stares at him in silence with his cold look and thinks it was just because he seemed like the easiest target of all. As Elric could not say that aloud, he only changes the subject, smiling and suggests the negotiation be a good opportunity to fix the bad impression of their first meeting, leaving Polo relieved. The young man then takes advantage of the friendly mood to say he has one last request to make, and the official promptly asks him to say what it is about. With a calm tone of voice, the young master warns that if after that day any rumor arises that Kasha was seen in Weben, things are going to get complicated. Elric takes a terrifying expression and warns in a dark way that in case that happens, their contract will be rewritten with blood. Completely terrified by the mortal threat, Lord Polo only swallows hard and immediately agrees, shaking his head. Later, all commercial delegates gather around a large round table to formalize the closing of discussions. Tyria Portman stands up from her chair and announces with a beautiful smile that her family will officially close the commercial agreement with the Imperial Army. Satisfied with the plan's outcome, Elric claps discreetly while watching his wife conduct the moment with mastery. While the delegation celebrates the achievement, Lord Polo receives congratulations from a travel companion, though he still looks a bit nervous. However, Edmund Oogle strikes the table hard, completely indignant with the presented terms, and rants that agreement doesn't make the slightest sense. The irritated diplomat yells at Tyria, questioning if she didn't hear the orders of the Lord of the Barony, but the girl only smiles with calm and answers. Everything is running exactly as her husband planned. He leans furious over the table and asks if she has a notion of how absurd that transaction is, calling her miss, but the girl soon interrupts him, saying the correct is mistress. The sudden correction leaves the proud noble with graying hair totally confused and speechless. She positions herself in an imposing way beside her husband and formally introduces herself as Tyria Portman, the rightful wife of the lord of those lands, with a sharp and threatening look. She adds it is a tremendous lack of manners of Edmund's comedy to keep getting her title wrong on purpose. Sensing the strong pressure of the scolding, the diplomat swallows his own pride and fixes his collar while stammering an apology to Lady Tyria. Seeing the humiliation of his arrogant colleague, Lord Polo can't hold back and lets out a discreet laugh to mock the situation. Elric sighs, relieved, and closes his eyes with a slight smile on his face, proud of his wife's firm stance. He then rests his hands with firmness on the handle of his dark wooden cane to begin to stand up from the table. Already in the external courtyard, the young master directs his guards to take the guests safely back to the train station. From inside the departing carriage, Lord Polo waves with the contract in hand to say goodbye to the host. Elric only watches the merchant's departure with a serious and silent face. The Portman couple remains side by side in the golden field, watching the vehicle distance itself toward the horizon under the sunny sky. The young man turns to his wife and confesses he now sees her with other eyes, admitting he didn't know she had such a firm and resolute side. With closed eyes and maintaining her usual elegance, she only answers she limited herself to speaking the truth. Next, the young blonde lady gives a slight smile and comments he also revealed himself to be a quite clever man, leaving the husband quite surprised with the praise. Showing the roll of contract paper, she explains that Polo handed her the documents and that the real conditions of trade were well different from those announced to the public, proving they didn't come out losing in anything, scratching his neck in an awkward way. Elric confesses the envoy of Armin was way too arrogant and that he only wanted to hurt that man's pride, receiving Tyria's full support. The girl then suggests they return to the mansion premises, and the young man agrees immediately, walking calmly by her side. Meanwhile, the focus moves to a large yellow flag with the initials of Edward Wibben fluttering under the cloudy sky. It is the luxurious private residence of the young man, the same who had organized that large commercial exclusivity trap. Suddenly, a hysterical shriek of pure despair echoes through the imposing golden doors of the grand house. Edward runs desperate through the luxurious hallways while holding his head and yells without understanding the reason his plan went wrong. The young blonde man with glasses cries from anger and rants. He was willing to buy the wheat for a fortune and split the profits, questioning what left Elric so unsatisfied to the point of refusing. He runs toward the balcony shouting from frustration, while his loyal assistant with white hair tries in vain to calm him. Completely out of his mind, he flails in the air and rants that Elric ruined all his perfect plans just to satisfy himself. In the middle of his fit, the young man ends up tripping on his own foot in an extremely clumsy way. He totally loses his balance and plunges backward toward the room floor. However, before he suffers a painful fall, a hand grips his wrist with extreme agility. Edward hangs upside down and widens his eyes from surprise upon realizing he was saved in the last second. With impressive reflexes, the beautiful young woman with silver hair catches him firmly in her arms. She holds him with ease in bridal carry style, while the dust rises around the impressive demonstration of physical strength. The girl gives him a scolding for not listening to her advice to maintain calm, causing him to immediately apologize in a gentle way. Shortly after, a dose of hot and comforting tea is served in a luxurious cup decorated with golden details. The assistant asks if he finally managed to calm down a bit, and the young man thanks for the tea with affection. Already recovered from the scare, Edward crosses his fingers and reflects intrigued that, knowing Elric's past as the feared Kasha, he would never expect him to accept doing direct business with the Empire, questioning what the rival would be planning after all. With a calm and analytical look, the beautiful assistant with silver hair suggests that to discover someone's true intentions, sometimes the best path is simply to ask in a direct way. Edward Wibben agreeingly ponders the suggestion and concludes he truly will have no other choice but to go question his rival in person. Decided to take action, the young blonde man extends his hand firmly to open one of the ornate drawers of his desk. With a serious and focused look, he opens the secret compartment while pondering the next step of his move. Inside the drawer, a richly decorated gold revolver reveals itself over a red velvet cushion, accompanied by the thought that they will need a proper means of conversation for this occasion. Meanwhile, the story shifts to the imposing and luxurious residence of Elvis Graham. Settled in his wheelchair, Elvis gives warm welcome to Lord Polo, who has just arrived from his trip and promptly hands him an important document. The noble with light hair accepts the roll of paper immediately and curiously, questions what that mysterious message is about. Polo reveals with seriousness it is a letter sent to him directly by Elric Portman himself, leaving the host quite surprised to hear that family name. With hands covered by elegant white gloves, Elvis slowly unrolls the parchment to start the reading. He passes his eyes over the written lines and adopts an extremely serious and focused face while analyzing the content of the message. Suddenly, the aristocrat can't contain himself and lets out a muffled laugh. Leaving the merchant with the mustache totally confused with that unexpected reaction, Elvis Graham throws his head back and begins to laugh out loud from pure amusement, covering his own face with his hand. Laughing at the situation, the young man comments he kept imagining who this Elric guy would be, highlighting that Polo must have taken the biggest scare of his life, running into the terrible Kasha, still displaying a wide smile on his face. He sincerely thanks the merchant for going to the trouble of delivering the letter to him in person. Satisfied for fulfilling his role, Lord Polo warns his task there was completed and says goodbye to start his return journey, receiving the host's wishes of a safe trip. Now alone in his office, Elvis looks thoughtfully at the letter and mutters that the feared sword demon vanished so suddenly he wondered where he was, surprised to discover he had departed precisely to the Waben lands. The scene then changes to a dirt road surrounded by hills covered in fresh snow, where the echo of sudden shots breaks the silence of the environment. The barrel of a hunting shotgun lets out smoke in the middle of the frozen forest right after the well-aimed shot. A young hunter joyfully celebrates the success of his aim, while his companions celebrate in the background with shouts of enthusiasm. The boys run excited toward the huge deer that lies taken down in the snow, celebrating that great feat will finally guarantee their promotion to the level of professional hunters. While two of them kneel to examine the prey and discuss the hard work it will be to drag the animal back, the group leader stops abruptly upon feeling a terrible bad feeling. The companions find his sudden paralysis odd and ask him to stop zoning out and go fetch the horses already, questioning if he is unable to hear them. With sweat dripping down his face from pure dread, the young man makes a silent sign with his finger on his mouth and begs for them to get quiet immediately. He wields his staff defensively and in a low voice orders the two to step away immediately from the prey, generating even more confusion in the other hunters, trembling from fear. The young man explains he is feeling a terrible shiver down his spine, indicating the imminent presence of a magical beast in the surroundings, insisting they need to flee from there without wasting time. The companion disdains the warning and says it's obvious it is cold because they are in the middle of winter, sharply ordering him to stop speaking nonsense and bring the mounts already. However, a violent crash shakes the ground right before the group, causing everyone to enter absolute panic all at once. Desperate, the young man points his firearm forward and bawls for the idiots to get out of the way once and for all, because there is something terrible right behind them. From the middle of the frozen trees, a gigantic and monstrous creature emerges silently and projects its threatening shadow over the terrified hunters. A colossal wolf with sharp teeth and eyes shining in a supernatural blue tone reveals itself, known as the feared Blade Wolf. A short time later, the setting moves to the imposing Portman mansion under a sky heavy with snow clouds. Settled in her sitting room, Tyria Portman listens to the account with an expression of deep shock and concern before the gravity of the situation. The three surviving hunters appear kneeling before her, with dirty and downcast faces, confessing they fled the location in complete panic to save their lives, demonstrating her immense kindness and empathy. The young lady thanks them for their courage to report what occurred and suggests they take a hot tea to calm down, promising she will talk to her husband to resolve the problem once and for all. She then turns to the housekeeper and requests that Rhonda provide hearty meals and hot drinks to warmly welcome the scared young men in the family's private library. The loyal butler Aldio removes a heavy illustrated encyclopedia of monsters from the wooden shelves. Walking side by side with the mistress through the hallways, the old man analyzes the book pages and crosses the information with the desperate accounts of the surviving hunters. He closes the book with seriousness and reveals that the terrible creature spotted in the forest is, without doubts, a specimen of the dangerous blade wolf Tyria. Questions scared if it really is about a magical beast, and Aldio confirms yes, though he explains the species should have vanished from the region after the death of its old leader. The girl widens her eyes and recalls that that leader of the pack was precisely the beast that left that deep scar on Elric's neck during the confrontation of the past faced with that painful memory. A look of absolute determination arises on the Portman heir's face. She takes a firm stance and declares she won't allow any resident of her lands to run the same mortal danger her husband faced, decreeing she will immediately organize an extermination group to hunt the monster. Aldio makes an elegant bow of respect and ensures he will personally take care of recruiting highly qualified elite hunters for the subjugation mission. However, before he steps away, Tyria calls him one more time in a resolute way. With a conspiratorial and serious look, she makes a silent sign and demands that entire hunting operation be kept an absolute secret from Lord Elric. The old butler stands momentarily surprised with his mistress's unusual request, but soon agrees and promises to keep the secret as requested the next morning. The preparations for the departure of a luxurious carriage are ready in front of the mansion's main entrance. With slightly flushed cheeks and an extremely affectionate smile on his face, Elric says goodbye to his wife, promising to return as quickly as possible from his business. The couple exchanges passionate looks, and Tyria wishes a safe trip to her husband, remaining beside Aldio in the snow-covered courtyard while she watches the vehicle distance itself toward the horizon. Worried, Aldio questions if it wouldn't be better to give prior warning to the Lord, arguing he might feel hurt in the future if he discovers the truth through other means. But Tyria ponders that, knowing her husband's stubborn personality, he would insist on resolving everything alone, even with his injured leg. The Portman heir looks away thoughtful and recalls that that situation makes her remember exactly a painful day of the past. In her childhood memories, young Tyria appears crying desperately while she claims for Elric's name, who ran toward the danger. At that time, the little young man had placed himself courageously in front of a colossal wolf with red eyes brandishing only a piece of wood to protect her, determined to not let her husband run danger again. The girl reinforces they must deal with the beast alone this time, and questions if her request is already duly ready. Aldio confirms yes, and presents the 3 experienced warriors he recruited, ensuring they are the best elite hunters in the entire barony. Tyria plans to wrap up the hunt before her husband's return, but the old butler is startled upon realizing she intends to personally accompany the extermination group Forest inside dressing in an elegant blue overcoat with fur details. The young noblewoman firmly argues that accompanying the people she sent to danger is her sacred duty as an aristocrat. Seeing he won't manage to make her change her mind, Aldio yields to his mistress's insistence, but imposes the strict condition that she retreat immediately in case the magical beast appears. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the bustling and frozen commercial district of Wibben, where the residents walk bundled up through the snow-covered streets. Under the snow that falls smoothly, the wooden sign of an old and respectable local clinic stands out. In the interior of the office, a friendly old doctor with glasses examines the prota's leg and celebrates the excellent recovery of the scar, asserting it is practically healed. Energetic with the positive diagnosis, Elric questions if he can already retire his dark wooden cane, but the doctor suggests caution and asks for him to keep using the support for a bit more time. Changing the subject, the experienced doctor focuses his look on the young man's neck and asks if the old deep scar of that region left him any permanent after effect. The young master smiles and answers in a casual way that it didn't leave after effects precisely because the wound was treated by an incredibly talented doctor. The doctor smiles with the praise, but recalls it was an extremely difficult treatment due to Elric's young age and the freezing caused by the Blade Wolf's bite, still remembering how the boy's father desperately begged for his son's life. The revelation leaves the prota completely shocked and speechless, as he never imagined his strict father would have acted that way for him. The friendly doctor laughs at the young man's reaction and confesses it was a striking scene, revealing it was the first time in his life he saw the imposing Lord Hoven turn pale from pure dread. Visualizing the stern image of his late father in thoughts, Elric swallows hard and admits it is quite hard to imagine that so cold man acting in a desperate way upon saying goodbye to the patient at the business door. The attentive doctor reinforces the advice for the young lord to avoid making excessive efforts in the next few days. The prota opens the clinic door and takes the first step toward the street covered by a thin layer of fresh snow. Supporting himself on his dark cane, Elric starts his return walk under the watchful escort of an armed guard. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls him by his full name and asks if the medical appointment went all fine, causing the young man to look back surprised. The young heir widens his eyes from surprise upon recognizing the man with a goatee right before him and exclaims Luton's name. Luton, who is a great childhood friend of Elric and now acts as a royal knight, grins from ear to ear and joyfully celebrates his old captain's return to the Wibbenlands, taken by a massive happiness for the reunion after so many years. Elric hugs his companion warmly, while Luton reveals he came running as soon as he received his letter. The prota comments on the rumors that his friend had joined the Royal Knights, and the proud young man confirms the achievement, enthusiastically displaying his beautiful sword granted directly by the court. Elric suggests they step away from there to talk and drink in some private place on his tab, and Luton accepts the invitation immediately, eager to know what the captain ran around doing during the time he was missing. However, the old friend's conversation is abruptly cut short by a messenger who runs desperately toward them, shouting for the knight Luton to deliver a comedy of extreme urgency. Completely out of breath and tense, the soldier extends a rolled parchment and loudly announces it is about a rescue request sent on behalf of the Portman family. The news falls like a bomb and leaves the two men completely stunned, with Elric demanding to know immediately the real meaning of that distress call from his own house. The messenger, breaking into a cold sweat, reveals with extreme hesitation that the young lady Tyria Portman is the cause of all that ruckus. With a look of absolute panic shining in his red eyes, the prota listens to the soldier confirm that his beloved wife was attacked by a terrible magical beast in the forest. Meanwhile, on the frozen mountains of Wibben, the deafening noise of shotgun shots echoes intensely in the middle of the blizzard. Two fierce blade wolves run swiftly through the snow, with their blue eyes shining in fury as they charge against the group of humans. One of the elite hunters positions himself firmly and pulls his weapon's trigger, firing a well-aimed shot against the beasts. The projectile hits the forehead of one of the monsters dead on, causing the immense wolf to let out a howl of pure pain and despair. While the warriors swap strikes against the pack and bawl orders to protect Tyria's safety, the loyal maid Marie runs desperately hand in hand with her mistress in search of shelter. Pointing toward the frozen trees, the young Ruiva spots an old wooden cabin and suggests they take refuge there immediately. Marie and Tyria run toward the entry of the old structure, while the maid begs for the lady to enter fast to protect herself from the cold and danger. From the outside, the hunter's commander loudly orders his men to light the lightstones to illuminate the way in the middle of the blizzard. The warriors wield the brilliant crystals and run in opposite directions, planning to use the magic energy released by the stones to attract the beasts' attention and steer them away from the cabin where the women are hidden. The plan works perfectly, and the wolf pack bites the bait immediately, proceeding to fiercely chase the hunters who carry the light sources. On the dark and cold interior of the makeshift shelter, Tyria and Marie snuggle together under a thick blanket while trembling from cold and dread. Feeling guilty for that hunt's outcome, the mistress asks for sincere apologies for dragging her loyal maid to the middle of that danger of death, but Marie counters she insisted on accompanying her by free and spontaneous will. Holding the young blonde lady's hands with firmness, the maid tries to reassure her and asks for her to hang tight just a bit more, as she already sent a rescue request and the rescue team shouldn't delay to arrive. With a sad and resigned smile, Tyria comments that despite the tight spot, she would take the same decision to keep the plan a secret from Elric, relieved for not putting her husband's life at risk again. Marie gets deeply moved by her lady's dedication and love for the young master, with tears of compassion starting to bud in her eyes. Meanwhile, under an intense snowstorm that whips the plain, two mounts gallop at maximum speed, tearing through the icy wind, riding desperately in the middle of the blizzard. Elric is consumed by a terrible mix of distress and insecurity, questioning why Tyria decided to face that danger alone, and if he really is such an unreliable husband in her eyes. While they ride swiftly in the middle of the storm, Luton yells for his old captain to try to maintain calm, promising he will save Tyria cost what it cost and asking for him to just trust his strength. Elric thanks his friend's sincere support, feeling a bit more comforted in the middle of the despair consuming his heart. In that fateful memory of the past, little Luton ran crying and breaking into a cold sweat while listening to Tyria's desperate shouts calling for Elric. On that day, the Portman heir had placed himself alone in front of the gigantic beast with red eyes to give time for the friends to flee. Little Luton felt extremely guilty for fleeing in search of backup and leaving his captain to fight alone against the monster. Returning to the present, the now royal knight rides with determination and silently vows to himself that he will never let his friend fight alone again. Further ahead in the frozen forest, one of the elite hunters spots the two knights approach and desperately waves to indicate his location. Without losing time, Elric leaps from his horse still in motion and runs toward the soldier awaiting him in the snow. The young master holds the hunter by the shoulders in pure despair and questions where his wife is, receiving the relieved answer that she managed to shelter in a nearby cabin. However, the warrior explains his companions ended up trapped after serving as bait to steer away the magical beasts and ensure her safety. Relieved to know his beloved's whereabouts, Elric asks for the soldier to guide him immediately to the location where the other hunters are isolated so he can save them. However, Luton firmly places his hand on the prota's shoulder and prevents him from proceeding forward with that dangerous idea. The knight argues he must go running to meet his wife, ensuring he will personally take care of rescuing the lost hunters, even knowing they are dealing with the dangerous blade wolves. Luton displays a confident smile and asks for the captain to trust him, proudly asserting he is no longer that coward boy of old times. Elric smiles back with pride and agrees immediately, recognizing his childhood companion finally became a true knight. The armored young man then orders the hunter to guide him to the location of the trapped companions, and the two quickly depart toward the rescue. With his heart beating strong from anxiety, the prota turns toward the shelter under the storm and mentalizes he needs to run as fast as possible to Tyria's arms. The Portman heir runs with all his forces in the middle of the violent blizzard whipping the Wibbin forest. His feet sink deeply into the thick layer of fresh snow at each quick and resolute step. Protecting his eyes from the freezing wind, the young man curses against the relentless blizzard and desperately hopes everyone involved is safe. After an exhaustive search, he finally spots the silhouette of the old wooden cabin in the middle of the trees covered in snow. Elric flings the wooden door of the shelter open all at once with a violent crash. Out of breath and taken by despair, the young master shouts for his beloved wife's name while sweeping the interior of the location with his look. Huddled in a corner of the cabin, Tyria and Marie jump in surprise and look stunned at the prota's figure who just invaded the premises. Without saying a single word, the young man walks with long and hurried steps toward his wife. Elric wraps her in an extremely tight and relief-filled hug, leaving the Ruva maid totally speechless before such a demonstration of affection. With blushing cheeks of embarrassment and surprise, Tyria returns the affectionate gesture and asks why he traveled up to so far to find her. The young master merely squeezes her body with even more force against his chest, as if he wanted to ensure she truly was safe and sound there. He pulls away a bit, and with a mix of anger and concern in his voice, rants that he is the one who should be making that question, questioning why she took such a dangerous stance without at least consulting him. Tyria looks away awkwardly, and in a low voice confesses she only acted that way because she didn't want to expose him to danger again. Hurt with the answer, Elric stares her in the eyes and asks with a sad tone of voice if she really trusts his strength so little. Desperate to undo the misunderstanding, the young blonde lady hugs him with force again and stammers. It wasn't that what she wanted to say by any means. The young man returns the warm hug and confesses he is just extremely happy for her being safe, begging for her to promise she will never face a risk situation alone again. Nestled comfortably in her husband's chest, the girl closes her eyes with a beautiful smile and makes the solemn promise. Wrapped in her own blanket nearby, young Marie watches her boss's romantic scene with an incredibly cute and satisfying expression of happiness. Suddenly, the noise of heavy steps echoes from outside the cabin, causing the couple to quickly pull apart with alert expressions. Marie runs to the entry to check and joyfully announces the other elite hunters finally returned from the forest. Safe and sound, Elric leaves the shelter beside his wife and congratulates the group for the quick and efficient work, thanking for everyone's effort on the mission. However, upon analyzing the faces present, the young master notices the absence of an important element, and his appearance instantly changes to a serious expression. He sharply questions about Luton's whereabouts, causing the chief hunter to look away with clear embarrassment and nervousness. The soldier reveals with hesitation that the knight ordered them to beat a retreat while he would remain alone to face the wolf horde, leaving the prota in an absolute state of shock. Dominated by a sudden fury, Elric strikes his hand on his forehead from so much frustration and curses against his childhood friend's stupidity. Without hesitating, he orders the warriors to escort Tyria and Marie safely mountain down, while he will return alone to the forest to save Luton. However, as soon as he turns to depart toward the blizzard, a hand firmly grabs the sleeve of his blue overcoat. The young man looks back out of the corner of his eye and runs into his beloved wife's worried appearance, who confesses to being terrified with the possibility of him getting severely injured. With eyes covered in tears and blushing cheeks, Tyria begs for him to make the solemn promise that he will return alive and in safety to her arms. Tyria then suddenly grabs Elric's coat sleeve tightly. With tears in her eyes, she says she is absolutely terrified of him getting hurt and begs him to promise he will come back safely. Elric gently places his hand over hers, telling her to trust him, and thanks her for caring so much. He smiles and promises he will bring Luton back home and return safe and sound. With that, the young blonde lady slowly lets go of her husband's coat and lets him go. With a serious look, she warns him that she truly won't forgive him if he breaks this promise to return. The prota gives a slight nod and says he will make sure to remember that. Meanwhile, in the frozen forest, a creature's paws run swiftly through the snow. One of the beasts lunges with everything toward Luton, who is already poised with his sword drawn. He manages to react quickly and slices the wolf in half with a precise strike. However, the knight is completely exhausted and bleeding heavily from his battle wounds. To make matters worse, an entire pack of glowing-eyed wolves emerges from the trees and surrounds him in the clearing. He lets out a weak laugh and admits he didn't expect to run into so many demonic beasts all at once in this place. The knight begins to feel very dizzy from exhaustion, and his vision grows more and more blurred. Realizing he has lost too much blood, he feels his strength fading away as the pack of monsters slowly approaches for the final blow. He shouts at the top of his lungs, comforting himself with the thought that at least he will pass away in his own homeland. Luton notices that the monsters hesitate to move forward and laments that he doesn't even have the strength left to lift his own sword off the ground. One of the wolves growls from close by, preparing to make its definitive leap. Suddenly, the beast springs fiercely with sharp claws toward the completely defenseless knight. He just closes his eyes and braces for the worst, waiting for the impact of the creature's fatal attack. But in the blink of an eye, a perfectly aimed shot from afar hits and pierces right through the wolf's head. Mid-air, Luton opens his eye in shock, wondering what just happened and if the hunters had come back to help him. That's when he sees Elric holding a firearm and mocking his pathetic state for a royal knight. The prota comments that the firepower of that weapon is impressive, even if it's not really his style, and reassures his friend by telling him that Tyria is already safe. Next, Elric approaches his wounded friend and says he needs to ask him for a huge favor. He looks directly at his companion's sword and says he is going to need it. The young man then asks if there would be any problem with borrowing the weapon for just a few moments. Luton hands over the hilt of the sword without hesitating, stating he would give his very life if requested. However, he warns that it is a very heavy royal sword and has nothing to do with the wooden training swords they used in childhood. To the knight's surprise, Elric takes the heavy weapon with ease and performs a few swift, agile swings in the air. The portman heir looks out of the corner of his eye and asks if his friend is still curious about what he's been up to during the last 10 years he was away. He turns calmly toward the pack of hungry wolves and says he is going to show him exactly what he learned. The monsters growl furiously back and get ready to charge at their new opponent. At that moment, Elric begins to focus a powerful blue magical energy in his free hand and comments on how sensitive blade wolves are to mana. Driven wild by that overwhelming energy, the wolves rush fiercely in his direction. Faced with the mass onslaught of the beasts, the prota takes a flawless combat stance with his sword imbued with power. The first clash happens extremely fast and kicks up a massive curtain of snow from the ground. With a swift, precise cut, Elric slices through the first wolf that tries to attack him from above. Without breaking his rhythm, he spins his body masterfully and takes down another monster charging from behind his back. Luton watches all of this from afar in absolute shock, realizing he has no earthly idea what his captain went through in those 10 years of absence. He remembers the image of the scrawny, weak boy he knew in childhood and realizes that the man in front of him is someone entirely different. In the middle of the battle, several beasts leap at the same time at the portman heir in an attempt to corner him. However, he maintains absolute calm and executes quick movements to defend himself and counterattack every single one of them. With overwhelming blows full of energy, he keeps eliminating every creature that tries to get close. He casts a quick glance out of the corner of his eye to ensure his wounded friend remains safe in the middle of that chaos. Next, the young master raises his free arm to the sky and begins to gather a massive amount of brilliant blue energy. The light generated by the mana expands violently, illuminating the entire frozen forest around them with an intense glow. With a swift movement, he channels this devastating force into the ground and creates an explosion that blows all the remaining beasts away with ease. Luton is left completely speechless, his eye wide in the face of his captain's staggering display of power. Before a now silent scene filled with defeated enemies, Elric turns calmly to his friend and asks what he thought of that. Elric smiles with a confident look and asks if that was enough to satisfy his childhood friend's curiosity. Faced with such a revelation, Luton simply collapses sitting in the snow, totally wiped out and speechless. He confesses with a puzzled expression that now he feels even more intrigued than before. Back at the cozy cabin, the Proto sincerely thanks Luton for all the help, but the knight replies that he barely did a thing. The warrior, now covered in bandages across his body, insists that his captain was the one who resolved the entire situation alone. Elric denies it and asserts he never would have managed without him, taking the moment to ask his friend for one more favor. With a grateful smile, Luton answers that the captain saved his life twice and that he doesn't even need to ask, he just has to give the order. The Portman heir proposes that the knight take all the credit for hunting down the demonic beasts, since he prefers not to draw attention to himself, leaving the warrior completely flabbergasted. Elric explains he has his own private reasons for acting this way, and presses the request despite Luton's obvious hesitation. Even without fully understanding the plan, the knight decides to swallow hard and accept his leader's mission. Sometime later, the main square is packed with residents happily celebrating and hailing Luton as the great savior hero of the province. An important elderly gentleman warmly congratulates the knight, impressed by the fact that he faced so many dangerous beasts completely alone, awkward and sweating heavily from embarrassment. The young man stammers that he actually didn't do anything big and glances to the side. In the middle of the crowd, Elric watches the scene with a complicit smile and places his index finger over his lips to signal that the secret must be kept. At that signal from his captain, Luton swallows his nervousness and decides to go along with the charade. He puffs out his chest and declares he only raised his blade for the peace of Wibben, causing the elder to proclaim that it is an immense honor to have a knight like him in the kingdom. The elderly gentleman raises his arm with enthusiasm and rouses all the people present to give a thunderous round of applause for their savior. The crowd's cheering intensifies even more, echoing the knight's name through every corner of the square. Satisfied to see that his plan worked perfectly, Elric smiles and decides it's already time to head back home. The carriage finally approaches the imposing Portman mansion, which is surrounded by a thick layer of snow. The vehicle moves smoothly along the icy road, drawing close to the main entrance of the residence. The large wooden wheels turn slowly on the frozen ground until the carriage stops completely. As soon as the door opens, the Proto quickly steps down and runs right into his beloved wife, who was waiting for him outside. With a beautiful smile on her face, Tyria welcomes him and confesses she was already starting to get a little worried about his delay. Elric affectionately apologizes and justifies the delay by explaining he needed to properly thank his friend and say goodbye to him in an appropriate manner. She asks about the condition of his injured leg and if he still needs to use the cane, making the young man explain the doctor merely recommended avoiding heavy physical exertion for a while. The young master gives his own thigh a light pat with a confident smile to demonstrate he is in perfect shape. Next, he changes his tone of voice and focuses his attention directly on his wife, leaving her visibly embarrassed. With a deeply affectionate and protective look, the young man begs her to promise she will never put herself in such a dangerous situation again. Quite flushed by her husband's romantic request, she gently agrees and ensures she will remember this advice very well. The Proto then suggests they don't just stand out there in the cold and invites her to step inside the warm mansion once and for all. At that, a gloved hand holds and pushes the imposing wooden entrance doors open so the couple can pass in an extremely gentlemanly manner. Elric makes way and asks for his lady to enter the residence first. Seeing that scene full of romance and complicity, the housemaids happily whisper that the mood between the bosses feels just like the heat of summer. Tyria approaches her husband and affectionately thanks him for the constant care he shows for her. But completely out of nowhere, the young blonde lady begins to sway and loses her balance, leaving the young man in immediate panic. Elric manages to hold her firmly before she hits the ground and desperately shouts his wife's name in the hope of making her wake up. A short time later, inside a medical carriage, the young blonde lady appears lying down and quite pale while receiving the first professional care. The elderly doctor with glasses sighs with concern and reveals to Elric that his wife's health condition is much more severe than he imagined. The health professional adds she might be approaching a critical and dangerous moment, leaving the Proto totally devastated. The doctor observes the young man's frantic look and comments to himself that the late Lord Hoven had exactly that same expression of dread in the past. Overcome by distress, the Portman heir grips the doctor's shoulder with extreme force and desperation. With a trembling voice, he begs the doctor to do absolutely everything in his power to save her. Since she is the most precious person in his life, the old man makes a respectful bow and solemnly promises he will do his absolute best to care for the young lady. Right after, the medical carriage quickly departs along the frozen road to fetch the necessary medications and equipment for the treatment. The young man remains outside the large mansion, breathing heavily against the freezing wind of the storm. Upon realizing the miserable state of their master, who has just collapsed to his knees in the cold snow, the maids run in a panic in his direction, shouting his name. The head housekeeper tries to comfort him immediately and begs him to try to maintain calm in the face of all that distressing situation. Sometime later, through the lit window of one of the mansion's rooms, the Prota appears seated completely alone at the dinner table. He stares at the untouched plate of food before him with a distant, empty look, totally consumed by sadness and worry over his beloved's condition. Suddenly, Elric hears a familiar voice asking if the food isn't pleasing his palate and looks up startled. He sees the image of Tyria sweetly smiling at him, like she used to do in their happiest moments. He recalls with melancholy that the two haven't talked much lately due to their hectic routines. Overcome by the pain of longing, the young man mentally asks himself if he could talk to her just a little bit more. Suddenly, the silence of the table is broken by a murmur of surprise. Rhonda and Marie appear to gather the dishes and notice with deep sadness that the young master didn't even touch the meal. Faced with this, the head housekeeper decides to quickly slip away to check on errands, leaving Marie quite worried. The young maid then gathers the tray with care and gets ready to leave the location. She thinks to herself that the young man usually devoured every single scrap of food with great ease. Rhonda catches his attention and comments on the fact that he's barely been eating lately, causing him to apologize and say he has no appetite. Worried about the young man's mental well-being, the housekeeper suggests he take a walk through the garden his wife used to frequent. The garden is packed with beautiful, brilliant blue roses that create an incredibly magical atmosphere. Elric admires the beauty of the plants, and Rhonda confirms that Tyria cared for that place with a lot of love since before his return. He realizes those magical flowers can only bloom in the harsh winter because of the love and magic engineering masterfully applied by his beloved. The housekeeper comments that he also liked botany a lot in childhood, but the Prota answers those memories now feel very distant. He silently reflects that the scent of flowers is no longer what occupies his daily thoughts. Instead of peace, his mind is constantly plagued by the smell of blood from violent battles and by the bodies from his old clashes. Rhonda reveals that Tyria kept precious memories of the plants and that when she was younger, she had the great dream of becoming a combat medic. Elric stands quite surprised to discover a young noblewoman coveted a profession so dangerous and geared toward war. At that moment, an old memory of the distant past arises in his mind, showing a hand delivering a small pouch of coins, seeing her master covering his face thoughtfully. The housekeeper asks if everything is fine, and he answers. He just remembered something important from his childhood. With the blizzard's cold tightening in the garden, Rhonda suggests they return to the warm interior of the mansion, and he agrees immediately. The night begins to fall gently over the Portman territory, painting the sky with shades of red and orange. The elderly butler, Aldio, raises his startled gaze upon seeing the young master suddenly invade the room. Elric stands puzzled and questions why the loyal butler is working in his wife's private office at that hour of the night. The old man explains he is reviewing a massive pile of reports and recalls he served the old lord of the family for half of his entire life, knowing that routine very well. Very irritated, the young man rants that he should have helped Tyria from the start, since that absurd workload was the reason she fainted. With all the patience and respect in the world, the butler clarifies he acted that way, only following his lady's express orders. Feeling guilty, the Prota asks if there is anything he himself can do to help, but Aldio politely declines the assistance to maintain focus on his tasks. The young master decides to retire and promises to ask Rhonda to bring some hot tea to comfort the old man during the work. In another mansion hallway, Marie hurriedly pushes a tea cart with all the necessary care to not break the china. The girl gives light knocks on Elric's quarters door and announces she prepared the drink, receiving immediate permission to enter. She enters the room and finds the young man with a visibly downcast and sad face, seated on the large sofa. Marie shyly approaches carrying the tray, not quite knowing what to say before her master's suffering. With all the delicacy in the world, the hot and aromatic tea is served in the white porcelain cup. The maid displays a friendly smile and explains she prepared the rose tea that her mistress loved so much, suggesting he try a sip. The young man stares at the golden liquid in the cup and mutters he comprehends the care behind that simple gesture. She tries to comfort the young master, asking him to not lose hope, as she is sure her lady will recover very soon. Trying to lighten the heavy mood, the Prota lets out an awkward laugh and apologizes for leaving the maid so worried about his problems. Marie makes an exaggerated bow in a funny way and insists it's no trouble at all, justifying she just got shaken up seeing him so sad. Awkward in the face of the situation, the girl quickly says goodbye and clicks the door shut upon leaving the room in the blink of an eye. Again alone with his thoughts, Elric lets out a long sigh and mutters his beloved wife's name in a melancholy tone. Under the light of a beautiful full moon shining strong in the night sky, he roots in absolute silence for her to get better soon. Meanwhile, in a medical clinic in the village, the window lights remain lit during the silent small hours. In the inpatient room, Tyria pants from a high fever with a damp cloth on her forehead while the nurse notes down her health conditions. The young blonde lady opens her eyes with difficulty and whispers to herself she cannot continue lying there useless that way. A tear slips down her warm cheek while she thinks her husband will end up getting sick from so much worry because of her. Upon noticing the patient finally regained consciousness, the medical assistant quickly approaches with a quite worried look. However, the young wife merely continues crying silently into her pillow with her heart tight from distress.